Chapter 431. Why does your majesty plot a rebellion? Mr. Perbuff says that an envoy has already been dispatched, Perbuff stated, hoping those two would know better. But we can't pin all our hope on diplomatic efforts, Leroy emphasized. What can't be obtained on the battlefield, can't be expected to be obtained through diplomacy either. That's also Mr. Gu's saying. Unless those two ambitious marquises understand that they can't interfere with the battle for Pincer City, they won't be too honest. The 2nd Division must be prepared to fight a tough battle. However, the worries of both men didn't come true. After receiving a reminder from the headquarters, the commander of the 2nd Division sent out many reconnaissance units to closely monitor the troops of the two marquises gathering in the south. The focus was specifically on those two Night Titans. The Space Warriors and the Allied Air Force were on standby, ready for battle. Once these two things appeared on the battlefield, the scenes that had been played out twice before could have the chance to be enacted again. However, the attitudes of the two marquises were rather ambiguous. On one hand, they put strong pressure on the envoy sent by Gu Hang, speaking very harshly. On the other hand, their actual actions were few, and apart from mustering troops, there were no further movements. Marquises Yasigo and Janviers once again expressed their strong dissatisfaction and protest to the envoy from Rage Owl Star, and after seeing the envoy off, the severe and fierce expressions on their faces were simultaneously removed. Both looked at each other and sighed. With a worried frown, Yasigo said, "Our protests are useless. The Allied forces must have already begun their attack on Pincer City by now, right? What can we do about it?" Marquis Janviers said, "You're not in favor of sending troops. I say, let's just try and attack. The Rage Owl Star people defending the south side of Pincer City number only a little over 10,000, while we have 200,000 troops, 200 knights, and you and me. Are we afraid of these 10,000? Yasigo said, "From the king's ambitious plots to complete collapse, how long did it take? Only half a month. Half a month ago, King Ness of Lumen was still thinking about how to permanently occupy the governorship, even risking all his assets, and got involved in the Gu family's internal strife. Now he can only beg us to save him. Do you also want to experience the same fate?" Janviers fell silent. If he had the courage, he wouldn't be here whining with Yasigo. Truth be told, King Ness of Lumen wasn't a bad king. In the past few years, he's been manipulating politics on one hand and focusing on development on the other. Many nobles, both great and small, were drawn into what's called the Royal Knights, and the power and privileges of the traditional nobility were continuously reduced. In their place was the gradually strengthening centralized power of King Ness of Lumen. This placed a great pressure on Yasigo and Janviers, the two traditional marquis lords. And among these pressures, the biggest source was the Royal Knights. 4 Night Titans, 400 knights, and 3/4 of the country's land and population were already under the centralized control of the king. Even the two of them had to show respect to the king and repeatedly reaffirm their loyalty. Such a king and a Royal Knights, which had been so oppressive for their two families that they couldn't catch a breath, were defeated by the people of Rage Owl Star in half a month. Who wouldn't be afraid? Very afraid. But now, the two of them still had disagreements. If we stand by and do nothing, and those people from Rage Owl Star capture Pincer City and win the war, what will our position be? Janviers asked a critical question. This was exactly where they found themselves in a dilemma. The envoys from Rage Owl Star communicated Governor Gu Hang's goodwill to them, providing terms. According to the envoys' words, they characterized King Ness of Lumen's actions as rebellion. This term made the two marquises feel rather ridiculous, the king committing treason? But they soon realized that the rebellion Mr. Gu referred to was not the betrayal they commonly conceived in their minds, but rather betrayal against the empire. King Ness of Lumen had attacked on his own initiative the Gu family, a member of the empire's official merchants association, and such a hostile act was already considered a betrayal against the empire. He must pay the price for it. This was a non-negotiable premise. Mr. Gu had made his intention very clear. No matter what the cost Ness of Lumen has to pay, the fundamental premise is non-negotiable. The anger of the Gu family will not be extinguished by anything or any statement. They will capture that king of Lumen. Whoever dares hinder this, will become an enemy of the Gu family, an enemy of Rage Owl Star. Under this non-negotiable fundamental premise, there is room for discussion on other matters. The two marquises can still retain their titles and pass them down through generations. They can still keep their own armies, as well as control over their territories. As for the Lumen kingdom as a whole, it will be preserved. They need to maintain their allegiance to this entity. From nominal obedience and management to fulfilling tax obligations and military duties. What does this mean? Are we to have a new king? How can this be? It seems not unacceptable. The history of the Lumen kingdom spans hundreds of years, with the Lumen dynasty having always been the ruler of this nation. But earlier on, this land was a battleground of multiple nations, until the Lumen family united the whole realm and maintained this unity for hundreds of years. Throughout these centuries, it seems that the people have become accustomed to, taken for granted even, the Lumen family's control over this land. But in fact, once this psychological barrier is removed, people might realize that having a different king isn't such a big deal after all. Would life really change? For the common people, it appears not, and it seems the same for the two marquises. After all, the terms offered by Governor Gu Hang's envoy were the same as the conditions they had when they previously served the Lumen family. Life went on as before, and so it will now. No way. John Veers shook his head and said, the Lumen family is one thing, but how can we accept a bunch of aliens sitting on top of us? Moreover, we are not without chances. Those Rage Owl Star people forces total just tens of thousands. With the Lumen family troops still in Pincer City, if we join forces, we can drive those Rage Owl Star people away, and the whole kingdom will be ours. The Lumen family has no longer the power to compete with us. Besides, it is not just us. The other nations, can they really accept a state controlled by aliens on Hagian Star? If we send out envoys, we can garner support. At worst, we cede some territory. John Veers grew more excited as he spoke. However, Yasugo threw cold water on his plans. By the time you've summoned foreign troops, Pincer City will have already been taken. John Veers hesitated and then said, that's the reason we exist. We must march and hold off those Rage Owl Star people forces. Moreover, even if Pincer City falls and Ness of Lumen dies, it doesn't matter. We can continue the war as long as we can get the other countries on Hagian Star on our side. Can those Rage Owl Star people really defeat us on our home turf? Yasugo continued to shake his head. Yes, they can. They have the help of interstellar warriors, they also have space superiority. That Gu Ming, once he's done for, the interstellar force of the Gu family will once again be controlled by Governor Gu Hang. Our planet's orbit will be in their hands, and we must fight the Rage Owl Star people under orbital strikes. After a pause, he continued, the largest external trade partner of the entire Hagian Star is the Gu family. Without them, our weapons will be fewer with each battle, and even the Titan could sustain damage without any place for repairs. At this point, Yasugo concluded, in conclusion, I've made my decision. I'm going to quietly watch what happens to Pincer City from here. I will not let my troops attack the Rage Owl Star people. As for you, do as you please. John Veers frowned deeply. He had to admit, Yasugo had made some very valid points. And what's more, without Yasugo's movement, the forces he could mobilize were insufficient for the plan he had described. Even combined, they might not be able to manage it, let alone him alone. He wanted to persuade Yasugo further, but Yasugo didn't give him the chance, leaving straight away. Chapter 432. Yasugo accepted Gu Hang's terms by default, followed immediately by John Veers's acceptance. When the news that both marquises had been stabilized reached Gu Hang's ears, he couldn't help but reveal a slight smile. This was good news. If the troops under those two marquises had really come charging in from the south regardless of the consequences, it would indeed have been a bit troublesome. At that time, the pressure on the 2nd Division would have been rather great. Now it was much better. He relayed the relevant information to Prabhup, who quickly ordered his troops to begin the attack. Knowing that the two marquises had been stabilized, Prabhup also removed a weight from his mind. The reason the attack order was delayed for a while wasn't solely due to waiting for news from the south, but also awaiting more ammunition to be unloaded. Shuttles flying from starships to the ground hadn't stopped for a moment. In pursuit of rapid unloading of troops, the troops' reserves of ammunition and supplies were insufficient. It was fortunate that they hadn't encountered a high-intensity battle, or the expeditionary forces' ammunition might actually have run out. As for now, that problem no longer existed, and Prabhup could finally begin his fierce attack with peace of mind. There were two main objectives for this battle. 1, naturally, was the key figures Ness Lumen and Gu Ming. 2, were the orbital anti-air defense systems scattered throughout Pincer City. The attack was relatively smooth. The troops from the east and west sides almost simultaneously breached Pincer City's first line of defense, entered the city, and engaged the enemy in urban street fighting. In theory, street fighting in a city is very difficult. Once armored troops entered the city, they certainly still had a role, but it wasn't as significant as outdoor combat. However, in reality, Lumen people's first line of defense, relying on city walls and gates, had managed to barely hold for a day and a night. But once the street fighting started, their defense collapsed disastrously. The anticipated scene where each building had to be fought over repeatedly at the cost of blood didn't happen. The Alliance army's progress was rapid. And it was at this time that two more events took place. First, what many people could see, a number of spaceships descended from the sky toward the palace complex in Pincer City. Needless to say, that was undoubtedly the fleet controlled by Gu Ming, probably to rescue Gu Ming into space. However, just as Perbuff was about to order his troops' air defense firepower to intercept, Pincer City's orbital anti-air firepower fired first. Those few ships were directly shot down. Then, not long after, the front-line troops reported hearing gunfire from within the palace complex in Pincer's city center. The enemy might have turned on one another. Hearing this news, and recalling the earlier interception of Gu Ming's ships by anti-air firepower, Perbuff, no matter how slow to react, could roughly understand what was happening. This war was likely coming to an end. He didn't know exactly how to feel. Should he be happy that his troops wouldn't have to continue fighting, sparing more lives, or frustrated that the surefire military honors now had to cease? But whatever his feelings might be, what to do about it wasn't a decision for a soldier like him to make. He simply ordered his troops to continue with the original plan on one hand, albeit fighting more conservatively and reducing casualties, and on the other hand, he immediately passed the news to the governor. And he indeed received further instructions from the governor to hold his forces and watch the developments. About half a day later, an unarmed troop emerged from the palace complex and surrendered to the Alliance. Leading them was a burly middle-aged man, shirtless and bound up by his own hands. Perbuff had seen his portraits and photographs. This was the monarch of the Lumen Kingdom, Ness Lumen. And beside him was a person not so calm, with his mouth gagged. That was Gu Ming. Merely half a day later, Gu Hang, inside the military camp outside of the city, met both Gu Ming and Ness Lumen. Regardless of his bound and beaten uncle, who writhed on the ground with his mouth sealed, Gu Hang's gaze mainly rested on Ness Lumen. Bare-chested, in self-imposed bondage, even carrying a whip on his back. Well, look at that, another Gutara legend? Submitting to punishment as an apology? This monarch of the Lumen Kingdom really knows how to bend and stretch. As things had reached this point, he finally made up his mind without hesitation, even discarding the last wisp of wishful thinking, and made a decision. He couldn't let Gu Ming escape on his own. If Gu Ming escaped, there might still be a way out for him. He still had 4 fleets in space, and he still had plenty of connections and pathways. No matter how difficult it was to turn the tables, he could still try his luck in various ways. But Ness Lumen had nothing left. The power he had painstakingly accumulated over the years, the royal knights he had built, crumbled overnight. His capital was about to be conquered by the towering fury of another faction of the Gu clan. If Gu Ming escaped, he would have nothing left, facing death and the extinction of his clan. At the critical moment, he ordered his remaining anti-air defenses, which were still under his control, to shoot down the spacecraft coming to Gu Ming's aid, and urged his troops to kill the few security personnel protecting Gu Ming, capturing him alive. This was the sincerity of his surrender. He knew that once he came out, he was giving his and his country's fate into someone else's hands, to be manipulated. But what else could he do? It was a situation bound for defeat. He could only grab the last chip before complete destruction to secure the slightest possibility for himself. It was humiliating, but a true man needs to know when to bend and when to stand tall. Upon meeting, he knelt down in front of Gu Hang. I, the king of the Lumen Kingdom, apologize to the Gu clan head. Half a year ago, Gu Ming secretly visited, conspiring with me. Ness Lumen confessed everything from start to end without Gu Hang even asking, very sincerely. Of course, even without his admission, Gu Hang already knew the whole story. It was just that in the normal family council procedure, Gu Ming was no longer likely to win, so he took the opportunity to cause trouble, overturning the table. The designated location for the family council has always been Hajian Star, because no matter which country governs it and holds the gubernatorial authority, its main foreign trade relies on the merchant fleets of the Gu family. Both sides have had a good relationship over their long-term cooperation. They are not part of the Gu clan's forces, but they can be considered an important market for the Gu clan, one of the foundational elements where the Gu clan started. Wang Qi was wary of Gu Ming, but she didn't guard against Nest Lumen's betrayal. Even in Wang Qi's view, the many kingdoms of Heijian Star should have better relations with her. It would have been good enough had she not used Nest Lumen against Gu Ming, so why would the other party use the native forces of Heijian Star against her? Furthermore, she had sent people to monitor the situation. But she missed one move and was deceived by Nest Lumen. He was swayed by the notion Gu Ming presented to him of eternal control of Heijian Star. Chapter 433. A monarch of a nation, bare-chested and tightly bound, knelt before Gu Hang, painstakingly confessing the nature of his crimes word by word. Indeed, they were crimes. Nest Lumen had always known that simply binding himself and bringing Gu Ming to confess would be futile. Was it true remorse? No, it was due to being driven to desperation with no other recourse. Even if he didn't come to confess, if he didn't make this gesture, the end result would be much the same. Better to be thorough, then. This was humiliating, less glorious than dying in battle within his palace. He had contemplated whether to leave behind a king who died on the battlefield for his country, for the Lumen family, as a kind of resolution. But he wasn't willing to settle for that. Since he had inherited the throne more than 20 years ago, he vividly remembered taking the crown from his older brother at a time when the Lumen family was most vulnerable, when he was merely 14 years old. Over 20 years, he had exhausted every effort to form alliances, suppress opposition and engage in both covert and overt plots. When necessary, he didn't hold back from the bravery and courage needed to take to the battlefield himself. Thanks to his endeavors, the Lumen family had revived its former glory within a mere 20 years, from its shaky beginnings. His centralization of power not only concentrated the majority of the nation's strength but also left the remaining two powerful nobles struggling for breath. Given more time, he might have been able to dismantle the power of those two influential marquises following the old paths and finally achieve total unification of the kingdom. At the previous King's Council, he mobilized allies and showcased his power, securing for the Lumen Kingdom the position of governor for this term on the Heijian Star. For a time, on the Heijian Star, his reputation was unmatched. Consequently, the entire kingdom also seemed to reach its zenith. Some kings, after leading their countries to prosperity, succumb to indulgence and lead lives of luxury, others develop even greater ambitions. Nest Lumen was the latter. He never thought this was a bad thing, on the contrary, he often advocated this point to his loyal subordinates. Having satisfied his desires, he gradually clarified the direction of his ambition, to maintain control of the governorship of the Heijian Star for a long time, and then use this power to gradually subjugate the remaining nations. This was difficult and the process lengthy, perhaps consuming his lifetime or even requiring his successor to achieve it. He had thought he would be patient and determined in advancing his ambition slowly and steadily. But soon, a colossal opportunity presented itself. Gu Ming approached him. If he cooperated with Gu Ming, helped him secure the position of family head of the Gu family, then in return, Gu Ming would support his ambitions with the full force of the Gu family's trade channels and abundant finances. After much hesitation, he finally resolved to gamble for this great wealth and honor. He couldn't wait any longer, he had already revived the faltering Lumen kingdom, steering it back on course and into a decade of strength. He was still young, still capable of more. If possible, he wanted to accomplish his grandest objective within his lifetime, while he was still vigorous and in his prime to create an eternal dynasty for the Lumen family and even become the greatest monarch in the history of the Heijian Star. And then, it came to this. He had spent 20 years invigorating the state, strengthening the central government, and all the capital he had slowly accumulated was lost overnight. All his ambitions, all his plans, all his dignity, were utterly pulverized. And for this, he could only thank the man sitting casually in front of him in a makeshift command center, merely pulling up a stool. Gu Hang. He etched that name deeply into his memory. Now, he no longer sought dignity, nor grand aspirations. There he was, stripped to the waist, voluntarily bound, kneeling in front of Gu Hang. His attitude couldn't have been more abject as he recited his litany of crimes in front of a specially summoned group of surviving high-level officials from the Lumen Kingdom, along with emissaries from the two marquises from the south. He could sense a variety of expressions on the faces of the onlookers. Some were sympathetic, others felt humiliated or even resentful, some fearful and uneasy, others contemplative. But he could no longer concern himself with their reactions. His own fate, that of his family and his kingdom, they all hung on the merest thought from Gu Hang. All he could do was beg. I am willing to offer the entire Lumen Kingdom, all its wealth, all its territories, all its subjects, in a plea for forgiveness from Governor Gu Hang. My own life too may be given as compensation. Should you wish, I would acknowledge you as my lord and serve you loyally for the rest of my days, shepherding the Lumen Kingdom. Should you choose not to spare me, you may kill me, display my decapitated head at the city's gates for all to see. The descendants of the Lumen family will hold no grudge. You could select someone from the remainder to administer this realm on your behalf. His words were steeped in humility, his surrender almost without condition. He dared not negotiate any terms, he simply hoped to plead for a chance to live after his unconditional surrender. Even if he couldn't survive, as a last resort, preserving the Lumen family would suffice. Having said all this, he banged his head heavily on the ground. He did so with such force that he became dizzy, and the rough stones even cut into his scalp, blood trailing from the spot where he had knocked his head, spreading around him. Everything that could be said, that could be done, had been completed. Only the final verdict remained. With his scalp pressed against the ground, it felt like a century had passed before he finally heard a light chuckle. That was Governor Gu Hang speaking. How interesting, raise your head. His heart leapt with joy. The worst he had feared had not come to pass, Mr. Gu had given him another chance to speak. He raised his head and met Gu Hang's gaze, only to see a faint blue light flickering in Gu Hang's eyes. His own gaze became vacant, whether from the dizzying effects of his prostration or something else. As if in a trance, he felt like he arrived at a bizarre place. Everything within sight was desolate, the sky was covered with dark clouds, and thunder and lightning sounded menacingly. In the middle of the desolate land stood an unfinished temple under construction. A host of spirits, suffused with blue, chanted rhythmically with high spirits as they labored away. Where was this? This is my divine realm, Gu Hang's voice came from behind him. He whirled around, his expression one of shock. By now, how could he maintain the semblance of sincerity he had performed? All he felt was terror. What was happening? Gu Hang's smile was gentle. Just now, King Lumen's heartfelt speech really did move me. Since you're so earnest, of course I'll give you a chance to serve me. Amidst his words, a force of spiritual energy completely enveloped him. No, no, no. Gu Hang's face still bore a smile, but there can be no regrets now. Chapter 434. Regardless of how Ness Lumen's soul was silently pulled into the divine realm by Gu Hang or what treatment he received there, the atmosphere in the command post outside the Alliance Expeditionary Force City was merry and harmonious. Everyone thought that Ness Lumen was finished, but no one expected that this proud and ambitious king could let go of all his dignity and say those words. Nor did anyone anticipate that the Gu clan head from Rage Owl Star would actually agree. Gu Hang accepted Ness Lumen's apology and accepted his gift. From then on, the Lumen Kingdom was to take the surname Gu. This was the most significant change. But some things seemed to remain unchanged. Ness Lumen was still the ruler of the country, only no longer called a king but reduced to a duke. It seemed that Gu Hang truly believed in the king's oath of loyalty and planned to continue entrusting the reign of the kingdom to Ness Lumen. The kingdom's loyal officials and the envoys of the two marquises were filled with incredulity. So, magnanimous? What's the difference from before? Oh, the only difference is that there was now a Governor Gu Hang above the head of King Lumen. Duke Lumen. But what difference did it make to those below? Would they still heed Ness Lumen's orders in the future? No, perhaps that was too naive. It must be just about propping up a puppet, right? But isn't the Gu clan afraid that this puppet might get out of control? Or do they need to plant many of their own people? But is it worth it? Many questions swirled in the minds of these people. However, outwardly, everyone's reactions were surprisingly consistent. They were grateful for Governor Gu Hang's leniency and swore to govern diligently henceforth, serving the governor well, with some even hinting at keeping a close watch on Ness Lumen. Ness Lumen himself also behaved normally. He was joyous at Governor Gu Hang's generosity and swore to reflect earnestly and work hard. Thus, it seemed that a seemingly happy ending had been reached. After sending away the many visitors, Gu Hang, now alone, called up the system interface. A brand new function interface appeared here. Vassal. Upon opening it, he saw some new information. Hagian Star, Lumen Kingdom. Vassal level, LV3, low tendency for secession. Status, military conquest, puppet sovereign, internal secessionism. Monthly enfeoffment revenue, 344 points. This was an unexpected pleasure. The vassal system itself he explored a bit, had no special functions, just some display of data. But having this display was already very good. The vassal level was a rating given by considering various factors, including the degree of foreign powers' interference, control over the ruling class, local secessionism within the vassal state, and the emotions of the vassal state's populace. LV3 symbolized an average level, and maintaining this grade meant that the likelihood of this vassal territory breaking away, becoming independent, or seceding wasn't high. Below LV3, it would be more turbulent. At LV2, the probability of secession would increase. At LV1, it was like sounding the alarm, as almost certainly there would be secessionist uprisings requiring suppression. Conversely, above LV3, at LV4, it meant that secession was hardly possible. At LV5, it suggested that the vassal should be annexed into the homeland. Of course, this was not a game, but a real world. The system's given rating was accurate enough, but what to do specifically was up to Gu Heng. He could very well declare the full annexation of the Lumen Kingdom right now, appoint himself as king, and meddle in all of the local military, political, and economic affairs, and fully act as a ruler. But obviously, this would carry a huge risk. For one, the system might judge that Gu Heng only had nominal ownership over the area, or even that he had no such title at all, that his claim was not legitimate, purely based on military occupation, and that he hadn't even established effective governance, so it certainly wouldn't recognize this land as his own, nor would there be an income of enfeoffment points. Secondly, Gu Heng would find it difficult to establish a reasonable rule here. The other 6 nations would immediately jump, the empire would not easily admit this. Gu Heng's military occupation was very unstable, he would have to dispatch more troops to maintain it, rebellions could well arise one after another. This was why a vassal level of LV3 did not suggest a direct annexation. And Gu Heng would not do such a thing. For the time being, he was content with this vassal status. Don't underestimate the state of being a vassal. Gu Heng had already obtained what he needed. He could use the vassal state's government to influence national policies. For example, if he wanted to abolish feudalism here, free up the productive forces. Even without changing the nature of the Lumen Kingdom as an agricultural country, agricultural production should still be made more efficient, and the food output from millions of square kilometers of land could be significantly increased in value. And the labor force freed from farming could move to factories for initial industrialization. In a word, making the entire country wealthy was very meaningful. Gu Heng did not want to be dealing with a place that had a mere few 100,000 tax currency surplus every year. If the Lumen Kingdom maintained its previous state, then his actions this time would have been in vain. With more wealth, Gu Heng would be able to draw even more blood from the Lumen Kingdom. And beyond wealth, Gu Heng had his eye on another aspect of the Lumen Kingdom, its people. Chapter 435. The Lumen Kingdom wasn't large, in terms of size, it was about as big as a province under the control of the Rage Owl Star Alliance. However, this place, though backward and poor, was much better off than the initial state of wasteland world under Rage Owl Star. The relatively fertile land supported a population of 40 million, already matching the entire population of Rage Owl Star. Gu Heng planned to continuously extract population from the Lumen Kingdom as part of an immigration policy to populate Rage Owl Star. Rage Owl Star was his main base, building it up was the foundation of everything. The mining areas in the eastern provinces needed manpower, the Wuxing City industrial district he had built himself had an almost insatiable demand for people, thousands of kilometers of arable land in the Green Valley region, across 2 provinces, was just waiting for people to develop it. People and finances were both areas where Gu Heng could continue to bleed Heijian Star. Not to mention, the vassal army established directly on Heijian Star could also substantially replenish Gu Heng's forces. Moreover, vassal states could also provide a trickle of favor points as income, which was an unexpected bonus. However, the amount given was quite small, with a population of 40 million providing only 344 points. On one hand, this was because the productivity of the Lumen Kingdom was indeed too low. On the other hand, the favor points given by vassal states inherently came at a huge discount. And this discount would increase as the vassal level increased. These were all direct benefits. Politically, the death of Lin's Lumen could also fulfill the stratagem he had previously discussed with his mother. Ness Lumen wasn't just the sovereign of the Lumen Kingdom, he was also the planetary governor of Heijian Star, even if he was just an elected governor with a term limit by the King's Council. Before, Gu Heng was worried about how, after plotting to dispose of Ness Lumen, he would smoothly handle the matter of this temporary governorship, Now he didn't have to worry. Ness Lumen was naturally meant for the role, and, handling international affairs within Hagian Star, he would be under a lot less pressure. As for the fact that Ness's term had only 2 years left, no matter, he would deal with it in 2 years. Perhaps by then, Hagian Star wouldn't need to elect a governor at all. After checking the information on the vassal system, Gu Hang casually opened another message. This was a routine battle settlement report. Pincer City Campaign, Bloody Battle, Bloody Victory, awarded 5695 favor points. Total losses 16,144, enemy casualties 67,823, prisoners captured 52,446. Alliance Expeditionary Force, losses 16,144, enemy casualties 67,823. The favor points reward was roughly within Gu Hang's expectations, maybe even a little less than expected. Although the Lumen forces weren't hard to beat, those 4 Night Titans, along with the sentry mechas destroyed by his forces, weren't junk, they were high-value targets that increased the overall reward. Just, the phrase bloody battle, bloody victory was a bit glaring. Although, after he led the team from Rage Owl Star as reinforcements, the resulting battles could be described as thrilling. However, before that, at the start of the fighting, Perbuff led 3 divisions to fight a bloody 8-day battle in the suburbs, and the losses were indeed substantial. Being designated a bloody battle, bloody victory, Gu Hang reluctantly accepted it. What else could he do if he didn't? With the additional 5,000 plus favor points, Gu Hang's total favor points on hand broke through to 17,594. This total was the result of a large income after winning the previous battle in the North Territory of Rage Owl Star and defeating the Primal Fury Owl, along with the monthly favor income from the past 2 months that Gu Hang had not spent and so had accumulated. Adding to that this recent gain of over 5,600 points, it all added up to so much. In fact, it could have been higher. However, Gu Hang had recently upgraded his spiritual energy level from LV5 to LV7, particularly costly during the jump from 6 to 7, requiring him to spend 10,000 favor points. Of course, it wasn't in vain. That expenditure of over 10,000 points to level up was necessary. Otherwise, today's subjugation of Ness Lumen would have been difficult. Within the vassal interface, the Lumen Kingdom had a tag that read Puppet Sovereign. That, of course, referred to Ness Lumen. And this puppet was not just a puppet in a simple sense. Ness Lumen, although he had clearly expressed his unconditional surrender and willingness to devote himself fully to Gu Hang in speech, Gu Hang had reviewed his past and learned a bit about his character from his mother's accounts. He wasn't a coward or a waste, he wasn't someone easily manipulated. The more earnest and humble his attitude seemed in Gu Hang's presence, the less Gu Hang believed him. What was the ambition of the mighty lying low for? Gu Hang knew the story of enduring humiliation to carry out a mission earnestly. He was confident he could outwit Ness Lumen, especially since he held all military power, and without a blade in his hand, an external trade depending on the Gu commercial firm, it was hard for Ness to stir up too much trouble. However, this was just a vassal state, a colony. Gu Hang's stronghold was still on Rage Owl Star, and he couldn't stay here for a long time in the future. One look at this guy, and it was clear he wasn't the sort to contentedly play puppet. Perhaps he would behave very well at first, earnestly doing what Gu Hang asked of him, but he would likely be scheming in secret, amassing strength for the future. Fear was one thing, but it was genuinely bothersome. And it could drag down Gu Hang's progress on his own plans. Yet Gu Hang couldn't give up the political significance of having him around, and he did have actual administrative abilities. Chapter 436. Thus, creating a true puppet had become necessary. Gu Hang had obtained the ability mind manipulation in a past upgrade. He had always restrained himself from using this ability, but now, it was time to employ it. However, the ability of mind manipulation was not as invincible as one might imagine. It had time limitations. If the content altered significantly from the subject's true nature, the likelihood of breaking free became high. Those whose minds had been altered showed deviations in character, making them easy to detect. Intelligence and subjective initiative were greatly impacted, and in the absence of orders, one might become foolish, relying only on instinct. These were all problems. In combat, using it to influence enemies was fine, but cultivating a qualified political puppet posed bigger issues. But if it were just these technical difficulties, there were still ways to compensate. At worst, Gu Hang would need to visit Hagian Star more frequently, occasionally reinforcing Nesluman with a boost of spiritual energy. The other core issue, though, was more significant. Faced with masters of spiritual energy, or judges, or senior clergy of the state religion, Nesluman's mind-manipulated state would be very easy to expose. And Gu Hang needed this man to serve as the planetary governor of Heijian Star for a long time to come. A planetary governor whose mind had been altered was no small matter. Once exposed, the ensuing investigation would create significant trouble. To be cautious, Gu Hang decided to undertake a major operation. He pulled Nesluman's soul into his divine realm and meticulously reconstructed it from the ground up. The difficulty of the major reconstruction far exceeded Gu Hang's initial estimates and required more than just the talent for mind manipulation. It also called for harnessing the true realm origin power. Fortunately, with the home field advantage in the divine realm, he managed to complete the task. Even more, in the process of executing this surgery, he gained some additional insight. Could he apply the corresponding technology to his own soldiers? Leaving out the mind manipulation part, emphasizing the implantation of subspace origin, adding physical remodeling and enhancement not involved this time. What would that create? Storm Chosen? They would certainly be very strong. However, that was just wishful thinking for now. Reforming a mind, creating a puppet, was already exhausting enough. He was nearly worn out, let alone making Storm Chosen. Yet, the considerable effort Gu Hang put into creating such a super-covered puppet was very valuable. Today, he could ensure that unless someone with far greater mastery in the realms of the soul and spiritual energy inspected Nesluman closely, conventional detection methods would certainly not reveal the planetary governor of Heijian Star had been mind-controlled. Nesluman retained his personality, his intelligence, only now he would guarantee absolute loyalty to Gu Hang. Even, if necessary, Gu Hang could at any moment project his own consciousness into Nesluman's body. This was much more secure. He had expended a great deal of mental energy in creating such a super stealth puppet, and the number he could maintain at any given time was extremely limited. Paying such a great price, Gu Hang achieved the best possible outcome he could, and there should be no mishaps. If he were to be unlucky enough to encounter a mind master far superior to him who decided on a whim to conduct a thorough examination of Nesluman, then he would have to accept his fate. However, the probability of such an occurrence should be infinitely small. Gu Hang felt he could be quite at ease. Chapter 437. After dealing with Nesluman's affairs and securing a puppet sovereign, Gu Hang didn't stay much longer on Heijian Star. About a week later, he left the place and returned to Rage Owl Star. Of course, he was very busy during the week before his departure. He and Nesluman met with many people non-stop, most of whom were mid to high-level rulers of the Lumen Kingdom. Many had died in the previous wars, but there were also survivors. And among the most important were the two remaining marquises with real power in the Lumen Kingdom. The marquises from the south, Yasugo and John Veers, couldn't believe the reports from the envoys upon their return. In their conventional thinking, such a scenario was almost impossible. If it had been them, how could they possibly accept leaving Nesluman in charge of the kingdom? A puppet? Could a real monarch be used as a puppet? They didn't know whether to call it arrogance or confidence. As for the marquises themselves, their minds were rather complicated. They inevitably harbored thoughts of using the great change to further their own ambitions. Previously, they had considered making a risky move against the Rage Owl Star people's defenses. It was this thought that influenced them. Of course, looking at the current situation, they could only say that it was fortunate they hadn't really lost their heads then. Having abandoned the idea of opposing the Gu family, they considered changing their approach. After all, even if the Gu clan had seized the Lumen Kingdom, someone would still need to manage it, wouldn't they? Wouldn't the two marquises be the obvious choices? But the recent developments had also cut off this path. The Lumen family would continue in power. Although, this Lumen family was no longer the same as the one before, whose royal knights had been so oppressive they couldn't breathe. But, even with the royal knights gone, there were still the troops from Rage Owl Star. The Gu family would certainly leave military forces to safeguard the Lumen Kingdom, and they still wouldn't dare to cause trouble. As for Nesluman's capabilities, they had experienced them thoroughly over the past 20 years. No matter if this fellow was planning some small moves or truly serving the Gu family, they might still target the two marquises. The marquises realized that after going full circle, the situation for both of them didn't seem to have changed at all. What a pointless excitement! Then, an invitation arrived, requesting their presence in Pinsir City to meet His Majesty the King and the King's Master. The two marquises hesitated, felt reluctant, even harbored resentment and anger. But in the end, they had no choice but to go. After meeting with the Lumen Kingdom's high officials and having made contact with those who would administer his colony in the future, Gu Hang spent a long time in discussions with Prabhupada. Gu Hang would leave behind 3 divisions for Prabhupada. The 2nd Division, the 13th Brigade, and the 36th Brigade would all be stationed on Hajian Star for the long term. The expeditionary force was officially renamed the Black Arrow Corps. Even the 34th, 37th, and 38th Divisions, which had been battered in the battles, might return with replenished personnel and equipment to join the ranks of this corps with honor on Hajian Star. Prabhupada was the one Gu Hang intended to continue as the commander of this colonial corps. He would, as a brigadier general, command this army to suppress the Lumen Kingdom. At the same time, Gu Hang also stated that Prabhupada need not concern himself with political affairs and let Ness Lumen handle it himself. He would only need to cooperate with the military when necessary or provide support to quell crises when there were internal instabilities. In addition, he arranged for Jordan Leroy, the chief political commissar of the Corps, to be involved in rebuilding the Lumen Kingdom's native military forces. Ness Lumen had already been authorized to re-establish the so-called Royal Knights. Of course, they would not bear that name in the future and would be renamed the Loyal Guard Corps. The Lumen Kingdom's government would undertake all the work, but Leroy should deeply involve himself in it. And the reconstituted Loyal Guard Corps, as a colonial military force, would be under the command of the Black Arrow Corps. In less flattering terms, they would be a vassal army. Prabhupada accepted this assignment. While it was somewhat disheartening to be stationed in a foreign land, as a soldier, it was his duty and responsibility. However, there was one point in the governor's instructions that puzzled him. He thought his main purpose for staying was to oversee Ness Lumen and ensure his loyalty. What he didn't expect was that the governor seemed to primarily want him to assist the king. This puzzled him, and he even thought the governor might be placing too much trust in the king, prompting him to consider advising the governor to prevent being deceived and to consider the risk of betrayal. But after a deep conversation with his political commissar Leroy, he dismissed these thoughts. How could the governor be so easily deceived? There must be some things they were not meant to know. They, as military men, should not engage in admonishment and should simply obey orders. Having met with the high-ranking officials of the Lumen Kingdom and having made arrangements for Prabhupada and his Black Arrow Corps, the colonial affairs of the Lumen region were largely settled. Of course, there were still some diplomatic issues involving other countries on Hajian Star. However, these were not matters Gu Hang intended to resolve personally. Chapter 438. Ness Lumen can handle this matter. Besides the matters of the Hajian Star and the colony, there is another issue that Gu Hang is certain to be very concerned about. The affairs of the Gu family. Ness Lumen came to surrender, in fact bound Gu Ming. Gu Hang had no intention whatsoever of conversing with this uncle of his, and directly handed him over to his mother. As for how Miss Wang Qi would treat Gu Ming subsequently, and how she would reintegrate the family's power, Gu Hang was no longer concerned. He had full confidence in his mother's methods in this regard. After all, she had been toiling over this matter for many years, was familiar with the situation, and had sufficient tact. The recent slip-up was nothing more than a misstep in the game. Consolidating the family's influence, handling the family business, these were all Miss Wang Qi's strong suits. She was definitely capable of doing it well. Most importantly, apart from his mother, he couldn't think of anyone else who had both the trust and the capability to unify this segment. Not to mention, he himself had no foundation whatsoever within the Gu family, and was completely clueless about the internal business affairs. If he were to take over now, the recently divided Gu commercial firm could possibly face an imminent crisis of disintegration. Gu Hang had complete trust in Miss Wang Qi's actions going forward. He only had one requirement: the family head of the Gu family had to be him. In response, his mother scolded him, "Do I need you to say that? What else would your mother have been working so hard for these past 20-something years?" Speaking of Wang Qi, Gu Hang had been very busy this week, but his mother was actually even busier. Several times, when Gu Hang had some free time and went to visit, he saw Miss Wang Qi constantly on calls, or discussing matters with staffers who had just arrived from starships in the sky. Most of her calls were interstellar communications, made to the leaders of the Chamber of Commerce fleet, to various business lines within the chamber, to friends on the Flying Wing Star. And, it was even enough to include quite a few calls to those who had rebelled alongside Gu Ming. She promised one thing after another, made one deal after another, and decided the fate of person after person. In this way, the situation gradually stabilized. She even left Heijian Star earlier than Gu Hang. Before parting, mother and son had a long talk. During the conversation, Gu Hang learned from his mother about some of the things that would happen within the Gu family in the future. The 8 fleets that originally supported Wang Qi naturally didn't need much discussion, they were the victors. However, these 8 fleets would probably still cause a lot of trouble later. Among the leaders of the 8 fleets, 7 were in this city during the pincer incident. At the time, Wang Qi's escape was entirely thanks to the full protection of Soldier King Lacroix, who faced an extremely perilous journey. The others weren't so lucky to receive such treatment. 4 of them died, and 3 were captured. For those captured, now that they have been rescued, it will generally be alright. Wang Qi will take good care of them, rewarding them, and they will continue to lead their own Chamber of Commerce fleets, perhaps even more closely aligned with Wang Qi. For the 4 fleets that lost their leaders, there was trouble. Wang Qi had to quickly find suitable successors who not only had sufficient prestige to command respect within the fleet but also had unswerving loyalty. Moreover, it wasn't just a simple matter of choosing someone. She had to prop someone up and do so without causing trouble. But overall, the issues concerning the 8 fleets that had originally been on her side were easier to handle. The 2 other fleets that had remained neutral from the start were also negotiable. They were essentially the franchisees of the Gu family, and after the family's infighting, they were among the most perplexed, but their attitude was the simplest, they were just waiting to see who would win. From now on, whoever the family head was, and whoever held the power, they would listen to that person. As long as they could ensure that continuing their franchise was profitable, there wouldn't be any problems. The troublesome ones were those 4 fleets that followed Gu Ming in rebellion. During her conversations with her son, Wang Qi also made her intentions clear. If she could, she would have wished to kill all those rebels. But that wasn't possible. She couldn't bear the loss of those nearly 20 ships, constituting the 4 fleets. That was a lot of money. No matter what happened in the future, she had to do her best to keep the people, only then could she keep the ships. And now, this matter had also reached a conclusion. 2 of the fleets, realizing that Gu Ming had fallen into Wang Qi's hands and that the situation was beyond salvaging, chose to surrender. During the communication, these 2 showed different attitudes. One cried bitterly, claiming to have been used and beguiled, begging for mercy. The other, however, was a bit tougher, bargaining for a safe outcome. Wang Qi comforted them effectively. No matter what she thought in her heart, or how she planned to settle accounts in the autumn, at least for now, after a brief haggle, she accepted these people. The rest would be discussed later. However, the other 2 fleets didn't trust Wang Qi's promises. They ran away. The fleeing ships, a total of 7, were all armed merchant vessels. In reality, these 2 fleets had not only these 7 ships, but should have included an equal number of giant belly transports. It's just that the giants moved too slowly and were unarmed with no capacity to resist, so when it came to fleeing, they certainly couldn't take them along. Wang Qi knew what these 2 fleets were planning. They simply believed that after committing such actions, Wang Qi would never let them go. Even if she didn't cause trouble for the time being, they were bound to be reckoned with afterward. Thus, they were determined to break away. They wanted to inherit and connect with some of Gu Ming's past networks in hopes of becoming an independent chamber of commerce. With 7 armed merchant vessels, they already had the credentials for it. But how could Wang Qi possibly let them go? Her network had also been fully mobilized. These 7 escaping ships would subsequently be designated as armed rebels, traitors of the empire. Wang Qi would do her utmost to prevent them from having the chance to become independent, and they had no hope of obtaining a license for an independent merchant fleet. Even more, they would be pursued as interstellar pirates. This was Wang Qi's punishment for the traitors, and she also needed the destruction of these 2 rebellious fleets to demonstrate her authority. And when she left the planet's surface, ascending to the heavens, the Gu clan fleet soon departed. Afterwards, she had lots of matters to attend to. And Gu Hang also left shortly after. Leading his troops, upon boarding the Blade Tiger, Gu Hang met with Yelizaya. "You've made quite a haul this time," Yelizaya teased him upon meeting. "When will we see another governor in the Tianma star sector who holds sway over 2 planets? Gu Hang smiled and waved his hand. He had indeed been considering exactly what Yelizaya had mentioned. But he wasn't at all embarrassed about it. This was his plan, and he said so openly, "I will strive for it, and of course, it will not be possible without the help of the Fufana family, without the help of the leader. Having Ness Lumen as this puppet was, of course, just an interim solution. In the future, the best outcome would naturally be for Gu Heng himself to come forward and receive clear dual appointments. There was precedent for this in the Tianma star sector, the Fatches family. The Fatches family controlled 3 planets in the Tianma star sector, and the governors were from that family. Furthermore, the governor role for 2 of the planets was held by the same person, with another deferentially following his lead. But achieving this was difficult. The reason the Fatches could do this was that they had made special contributions to the empire and had certain historical issues carry over. Now, that historical opportunity had passed, and for Gu Heng to replicate their path was extremely difficult. Yelizaya also thought this way. With a sigh, she said, "You don't hold back in front of me. However, your idea, the leader is unlikely to support you. Not only will he not support, but he's probably already regretting helping you." Gu Heng had anticipated this. But all he said was, "The leader will understand in time." Chapter 439. Gu Heng knew that the head of the Paydesi would not be happy. The reason was actually not complex. When multiple planets follow the orders of one governor, it is despised and guarded against by all star sector capitals. Why does Paydesi have such a bad relationship with the Fatches family? Apart from the numerous unethical behaviors between the two in government affairs and day-to-day interactions, a core point of contention lies in the Fatches family's control over 3 planets within the Tianma star sector. Considering Rage Owl star, there are only 9 worlds in total in the Tianma star sector, and Fatches owns 3 of them. What power does the star sector capital still have? In the political system of the empire, the situation is actually heavy on both ends, light in the middle. The so-called emphasis on both ends refers to the imperial center and the planetary governors. In theory, and in fact, the imperial center controls all the powers of the entire boundless territory of the empire. Naturally, this goes without saying. The planetary governors hold all the power within each empire world, within their jurisdictions, their word is law. And the 3-tier governments caught in the middle are somewhat awkward. Under the empire, above the planets, the 3-tier governments from largest to smallest are Cosmos Domain, Star Domain, Star Sector. For example, the Rage Owl star governed by Gu Heng is officially part of the Eastern Cosmos Domain Dragonhawk star domain Tianma star sector Rage Owl star system. And these 3 middle-level administrations do not possess complete dominion. Someone like Paydesi, the star sector capital head, nominally has the power to oversee all 9 major worlds of the Tianma star sector, but in practice, he can hardly intervene in the specific affairs of individual planets. He is the superior of the planetary governors, but this authority is significantly discounted. To those governors, as long as taxes are insured, they are like emperors in their domains. If the capital has orders, they might listen if they feel like it. And if they don't want to, what then? Having jurisdiction but being unable to dismiss, to punish, or to reward, makes this authority hollow. What power he does have is only because the imperial tax leaves a bit in his hands. In return, he is responsible for maintaining the Tianma fleet, the Star Realm army, and the overall taxation stability of the star sector. The star sector capital has the power to issue orders to both the Imperial Navy and the Star Realm army, being regarded as the top authority in military and political affairs. However, the Imperial Navy has its direct superiors, like Tianma Fleet Commander Tyler Mungs, who must also report to their superiors. The Star Realm army is the same. In addition, there are the Imperial Military Department, administrative departments, the Department of Taxation, which all exercise various forms of vertical management over star sector level affairs. All these factors make the position of the star sector capital very uncomfortable and naturally lead to power struggles with forces both above and below. And the specific circumstances vary greatly from one star sector to another. In some star sectors, the capital is more laissez-faire, does not compete or struggle, and is completely passive. More advanced ones will just do their assigned duties and be done with work handed up and down. But in most cases, the capital will still compete. After all, having reached such a position, who would content themselves with being a powerless idol? In the Tianma star sector, Paydesi falls into the category of more assertive capitals. By maintaining good relations with the Fufana family, he has managed to exert some control over the navy. By elevating his younger brother to the position of Flying Wing Star Governor, he has gained control over the most developed world in the star sector capital. Through cordial relations with the Gu family, he has secured control over the Empire Commerce Guild. By manipulating the selection of various planetary governors, he has strengthened his local control. All these tactics combined have made Paydesi an uncommonly powerful star sector capital head with real authority. However, the Fatches family, with its control over 3 planets, has always been a thorn in his side, beyond his reach. Under such circumstances, it goes without question that Paydesi, the Star Sector capital head, would most detest such situations. With the Fatches already in the Star Sector, how could he tolerate Gu Heng following the same path? Moreover, the Gu family possesses commercial energy that Fatches lacks. If Gu Heng were to further extend his governor's authority, overseeing multiple planets, it would inevitably lead to a conflict, a clash with the head of the Paydesi capital. But Gu Heng was not afraid of just Paydesi. If other Star Sector capitals have little real power, why can't the political ecology of the Tianma Star Sector change to be like that? The key lies in Paydesi capital head's control over several planetary governor positions and control of the Imperial Navy. The main influence Paydesi could wield was over the governorship selections of 4 planets, Flying Wing Star, Hongjian Star, and Karolia I and II. The most important of these are Karolia I, the nest capital world with a population of 40 billion, and Flying Wing Star, a highly developed garden world, a civilized world. However, it was not easy to upset Paydesi's control over these planets. Regarding the navy, that chiefly involved the Fufana family. Paydesi maintained control over the navy by relying on his exceptionally good relations with the Fufana family. And right now, Gu Heng was faced with a core member of the Fufana family. Previously, his mother had hinted at this to him. He was now seriously considering what the outcome would be if he formed a marriage alliance with the Fufana family. Gu Heng was no naive boy, he was not against political marriages. Moreover, from all perspectives, Yelazia was a beauty. Chapter 440. On the return journey aboard Yelazia's starship, Gu Heng didn't forget to communicate with Paydesi. Although he had started to view Paydesi as a potential rival, a stumbling block to further expanding his influence in the future. But for now, Paydesi was still someone he needed to please. At the moment, Gu Heng still wasn't able to directly challenge the Star Sector leader, and he even required a lot of help from him. The licking must be done. The moment the communication connected, Gu Heng could tell from the tone of the person on the other end, Star Sector head Paydesi, that all was not well. Ah, Gu Heng, you're really something. Paydesi's face appeared in front of Gu Heng, wearing a smile that still had a distinctly icy undertone. I'm quite curious, why did you leave Ness Lumen alive? Why don't you just kill him, and then I'll put in a request for you to take over as planetary governor of Hajian Star, how about that? Clearly, these were all sarcastic remarks. Paydesi's ridicule was something Gu Heng had expected. But in reality, Gu Heng wasn't all that nervous. As long as the call was answered, it meant that things weren't too bad. Of course, even though he wasn't nervous inside, Gu Heng still put on a sincerely fearful expression. Mr. Head, I made this call because I was worried you might misunderstand. Please believe that I have absolutely no intention of taking on the role of planetary governor for 2 planets. Ha, your troops are already stationed on Hajian Star, how am I supposed to believe that? I need to maintain the stability of Hajian Star, Gu Heng said. My mother has made it clear to me that I must leave a contingent of troops there. After all, Hajian Star remains a core trading partner of the Gu family. Blaming it on his mother was something he had discussed with Wang Qi. He didn't expect it to fully deflect the issue, but at least it was an excuse. Paydesi didn't care to dwell on this topic and directly stated his demands. You must withdraw your troops and your influence from Hajian Star. Hajian Star must maintain their traditions, the King's Council must remain. The Star Sector government will set up a branch office on Hajian Star to oversee the King's Council as they select their own planetary governor. Fine. Paydesi was somewhat surprised now. So readily agreed? He was indeed quite unhappy. He had authorized the Blade Tiger, carrying the troops of Rage Owl Star, to go to Hajian Star under the identity of the Imperial Navy to coerce both sides into a ceasefire, allowing Gu Heng to rescue his mother. It was a bold stance he had taken during the power struggle within the Gu family. But his authorization was only supposed to enable Gu Heng to save his mother. He hadn't imagined that in less than 2 years, not only had Rage Owl Star developed nicely, but a detachment sent out was also able to completely topple a kingdom on enemy turf. Even more unexpected was the fact that Gu Heng's forces managed to gain the support of over a dozen interstellar warriors. All this had made him increasingly wary. In his view, since Gu Heng had already devoured the Lumen Kingdom, there was no way he would easily regurgitate it. Once the rice was cooked, one couldn't just simply withdraw the troops, could they? He was ready to have a proper negotiation with the Gu family over this matter. Yet to his surprise, Gu Heng had easily agreed to his demand for withdrawal. This made him wonder, had he misunderstood this young man? Setting that thought aside, he figured, as long as Rage Owl Star's troops withdrew, they should no longer be able to maintain influence over Hajian Star. As for the Gu family's commercial impact on Hajian Star, that wasn't a problem at all. It had always been there, it couldn't just be taken away. Overall, Pei Desi was fairly satisfied with the attitude Gu Heng had shown. His tone softened a great deal as a result. The two further discussed the details of the troop withdrawal. Gu Heng expressed his willingness to withdraw, however, withdrawal wasn't something that could be done at a moment's notice. With the military force of the Lumen Kingdom depleted, Rage Owl Star's troops needed to remain there for a while to maintain order in the nation, preventing any major shifts in the balance of the 7 states of Hajian Star and suppressing the ambitions of the other 6 states. Gu Heng promised that the number of troops stationed on Hajian Star would not exceed 50,000, the related withdrawal efforts would be progressively completed over the following 2 years, and his forces would gradually depart from Hajian Star. He assured that by the time of Hajian Star's next King's Council election for a new planetary governor, his forces would be completely withdrawn. However, the substantial losses suffered by the Gu family on Hajian Star would need to be compensated by the Lumen Kingdom through yearly wartime reparation payments. These conditions were all within the acceptable range for Pei Desi. As long as the military forces of Rage Owl Star withdrew from Hajian Star before the next King's Council election, ensuring that the election would not be manipulated by military influence and that Hajian Star would not fall into Gu Heng's hands, he could accept it. To ensure this, the institutions dispatched by the Star Sector government would replace him in supervising everything. As for the reparations the Lumen Kingdom had to pay to the Gu family, that was no concern of Pei Desi's. It was only right. The conversation between the two men became increasingly harmonious as it progressed. By the end, Pei Desi even felt he had gained from the exchange. He originally had little involvement with Hajian Star, but now the Star Sector government he led could dispatch agencies to this planet to supervise the election of the planetary governor in the name of respecting tradition, giving him a chance to intervene. It was a good deal, indeed. Pei Desi's face remained smiling even as the communication ended, only reminding Gu Heng to remember their prior agreement to drive the Fatches family's forces off Rage Owl Star before he terminated the call. After the communication ended, Gu Heng's face also maintained a smile. Withdraw forces within 2 years. No problem. By then, the Lumen Kingdom's own military should have been rebuilt. In 2 years' time, it is uncertain if the unification of Hajian Star would be feasible, but securing the ability to firmly hold the planetary governorship, that is certainly doable. An independent and self-reliant Lumen Kingdom. Tisk tisk. Gu Heng thought to himself. He did not mind at all if the future planetary governor of Hajian Star was selected fairly through the King's Council. Upon his return, he would send a large number of agricultural machines, some government officials, and a few military experts to Hajian Star to assist the Lumen Kingdom in rebuilding their homeland, upgrading their agricultural industry, and training their armed forces. Gu Heng had seen before in the soldier token system that as long as 1/10 of a military unit was made up of indigenous population, with the remaining 90% being subjects of vassal states, it would suffice. He was going to properly train an outstanding military force for the Lumen Kingdom. After a 7-day space voyage, Gu Heng returned to his main base. The Blade Tiger docked at the starport. This was the first time Gu Heng had seen what his own starport looked like. 8 days earlier when he left, this was just a vast construction site. After completing the ground segment of the starport, a space station that had been constructed on the surface was launched up via a railgun. Of course, that space station was not large and far from a starport. However, a large orbital vessel, upgraded and transformed from the Wind Falcon rapid attack vessel technology using the Star Harbor technology blueprint, quickly transported personnel and engineering machinery to the space station through magnetic rail corridors. After that, containers of components made on the ground were launched up, workers in specialized spacesuits, under the gravity effects provided by anti-gravity engines, steered the engineering machines, smoothly assembling those terrestrial-produced components in space. Now, it was beginning to take shape. Of course, compared to a starport's standards, it was too small and basic, with limited capabilities and services. This entire starport was actually not as large as the Blade Tiger itself. But at least it now provided a boarding bridge and a space station capable of accommodating 1,000 individuals. Once the Blade Tiger was docked with the boarding bridge, soldiers could directly walk on the floor, drive tanks from the bridge down into Rage Owl Starport, and then take multiple orbital shuttle trips away from the starport to the opposite side. This operation speed was much faster than using landing craft trip by trip. Looking at the starport, though still small and rudimentary, Gu Heng felt a surge of pride. He could almost see the future vision of it being wrapped in armor, bristling with guns, equipped with a shipyard, and turning into a star fortress stronghold. Chapter 441. After landing on the ground, Gu Heng had a special conversation with the person in charge of constructing the starport. This person was none other than Hu Ke. Under Gu Heng's leadership, the two most outstanding scientific research personnel were both from the Mechanical Cult Guild, namely Hu Ke and Wu Jiarong. According to the guild's rankings, both of them had achieved the standard of an engine prophet. The person Gu Heng trusted even more was obviously Wu Jiarong. However, precisely because of this, she bore even more critical responsibilities. She had to constantly stay within the walls of the research institute in Wuxing City, guarding the black box that must not be known to outsiders. Her scientific research team needed to provide technical support for the increasingly vast production system of Wuxing City. Compared to her, Hu Ke was not as busy. His last major project was conducting agricultural production guidance and optimizing grain seed genetics in the Green Valley region. This was a job well suited to him as he specialized in genetic engineering. Aside from the agricultural construction in the Green Valley region, he also had work constructing soilless vertical cultivation plant factories in uninhabited settlements within the Central Province and Central North Province. The relevant technology was something Gu Heng had originally purchased from his cousin. Objectively speaking, Hu Ke's work over a considerable period had provided considerable support to the agricultural development on Rage Owl Star. At the same time, Hu Ke was also a professor at the Alliance Technical College, having taught many students. Let's not talk about those who were still in the learning phase of their classes, but those who had reached a certain level were brought by him to participate in actual research projects. After the technical guidance for food production was put on the right track, Hu Ke gradually disentangled himself from the work, leaving his students in charge of the related technical matters. Meanwhile, he himself was entrusted by Gu Heng with the task of supervising the construction of the starport. Truth be told, Hu Ke did not enjoy Gu Heng's full trust. He certainly would not be allowed to come in contact with the secrets of the black box. But the special thing about the starport construction was that it wasn't about creating a starport from a black box, but an entire blueprint. Included in the blueprint were, of course, several black boxes, used to produce key components or the parent machines for mass production of these key parts. This part was still left to the Research Institute in Wuxing City. However, there were also many generic components and structural production tasks, as well as the assembly of different sections, that required high technical expertise. Purely relying on technicians to handle it would be slow and prone to problems. Hu Ke and his team were there to take on this portion of the work. Even though starport construction was certainly not his area of expertise as a genetic engineering specialist, his fundamental capabilities were evident. Even without the bonus of specialized expertise, he was much more reliable than someone with poor technical abilities chosen at random. And he did not disappoint Mr. Gu's expectations. Hu Ke, accompanied by Mr. Gu, inspected the ground section of the starport. This was also a major construction site, but its scale was much larger than that of the orbital section. The utmost priority here was the second magnetic levitation track being constructed towards the starport. Along with the gradual expansion of the orbital starport, the newly established magnetic levitation tracks will greatly increase the throughput of goods and personnel in the starport, which for now, is only barely functioning. Overall, the situation was quite encouraging. At present, the main reasons restricting the construction speed of the starport were twofold: the production capacity of core components was concerning, and the number of machines suitable for space operations was severely lacking. Efforts were underway to overcome both issues. The core components of the starport currently relied heavily on being manufactured in the labs of Wuxing City, via black boxes, and then transported here for assembly. However, related production lines were already under construction. The first batch of mass production factories for starport components had been erected near Starport City, just waiting for the equipment to be transported from Wuxing City to start production. Once this factory began production, within 2 months, it could meet 70% of the demand for core components locally, vastly increasing the construction speed of the starport. As for the second issue, the space operation machines would mainly rely on the industrial power of Wuxing City. Once they were freed from producing core components for the starport, they would have more energy to devote to building more space engineering machines. Gu Heng nodded continuously as he listened. It was normal to encounter problems, as long as there were solutions in place. During the inspection, an alliance official also hurried to the scene. This was the chief of Xianja province, Raphael. As the first recovered province that was closest to the west among the three provinces in the east, under Raphael's leadership, Xianja province's development plan was the most comprehensive and fastest progressing. One reason for this success was the geographical advantage that garnered the starport construction in Skaro Highlands within Xianja province. The other reason was that Raphael was indeed very capable. During the inspection, Raphael detailed a series of subsequent development plans for Mr. Gu. There's no need to mention much about the starport. Raphael planned to build a city around this core, the starport. Skaro City would be also known as Starport City. The main focus of Skaro City would be a transportation hub. With several express routes, including railways and highways, forming a road network with Skaro City at the center, it would extend to all regions of the Alliance. Chapter 442. Relying on the many industries generated by road transportation, such as logistics, road maintenance, vehicle maintenance, energy processing, and a series of other industries, all were in the process of being prepared. Here, a large number of convenient commercial and trade services were also provided, facilitating subsequent cities and industrial zones to set up foreign trade branches in this place. These were the core driving forces for the future development of Skaro City. However, long-term forces were still a matter of the future. At present, the biggest driving force for the development of Skaro City was the construction of the starport. Undoubtedly, the construction of the starport itself would create a huge market demand. Hundreds of thousands of workers were working here, their food, clothing, housing, and transportation spurred the initial market of Skaro City. The parts factories serving the construction of the starport would also give rise to a large number of services. Raphael was even striving to introduce some production lines to establish a preliminary raw material processing system in Skaro City. With the help of the developed road network and the huge demand brought by the construction of the starport, Skaro City even had the chance to become an industrial city before becoming a hub city. This was certainly not a bad thing. During the half-day inspection of the starport and Skaro City, Gu Hang was generally satisfied with the development here. And just before Gu Hang was about to leave, Hu Ke applied to have a private chat with him. "Thank you very much for letting me participate in the construction of the starport." Hu Ke's face was overflowing with a smile. Gu Hang was also very polite. "It's I who should thank you for your efforts." No. It's what I ought to do. I'm taking the salary and benefits provided by the Alliance government, so I should do these things. But you let me participate in the construction of the starport, and the set of technical blueprints you gave me is truly... I apologize, I don't know how to describe it. This entire set of technical blueprints is simply unbelievable. I've learned so much from them. In the past, for a long time, I was very confused about my future development. I haven't felt myself progressing for a long time. But just in the past few months, I feel that my abilities have grown significantly. All of this is thanks to participating in this project, so I must thank you." Hearing this, Gu Hang had already faintly perceived what Hu Ke probably meant. But he didn't speak. Hu Ke sneaked a glance at Gu Hang's expression, didn't make out anything, so he could only continue. "Your planet, or to be more precise, the research institute controlled by Ms. Wu Jiarong, is truly miraculous. Various technologies keep emerging from within the institute, inspiring longing. If possible, I would like to join the institute." As expected, Gu Hang felt inwardly moved. In the research institute of Wuxing City, where technology kept spurting out like a fountain, it was impossible to hide such a thing from anyone intent on finding out. Possibly no one had such a powerful imagination to immediately think that there were already several dozen black boxes there and that there would be even more as Gu Hang unlocked more and more of the technology tree. However, it was quite normal to think that there were secrets there. Otherwise, were all these inventions developed by Wu Jiarong? That would be too genius. It's not that there couldn't be someone with such gifted talent, but even if there were a supremely talented genius leading the institute, whose scientific research ability was impeccable, it would still take time to produce so many results. But it seemed as if it took no time at all for Wu Jiarong to create all these. Gu Hang understood Hu Ke's curiosity, he would have felt the same way. And it was not just Hu Ke. In the past, although the development speed of Rage Owl Star was fast and the rise of Gu Hang was rapid, the stage was limited to the planet that didn't even have a starport, with little interstellar communication. Even if there were anomalies, people were too lazy to pay attention. Just as ordinary people wouldn't care about what happens in an ant nest. However, as the development of Rage Owl Star accelerated in the future, expanding its influence onto a larger stage, the situation on Rage Owl Star wouldn't be as simple as an ant nest. Even now, people began to wonder how Gu Heng managed to build a powerful army on a barren planet, how he had developed so rapidly in just a few years, and how those mature production lines came into existence. In response to this, Gu Heng had already prepared two sets of explanations. First, Wu Jiarong was a genius. Second, the Gu family had invested in and constructed it. These explanations might suffice for ordinary circumstances, but for those with intent, who had thoroughly investigated the rise of the Rage Owl Star Alliance, they would be a bit hard to accept. And Gu Heng didn't bother to find new explanations, he couldn't find any. On this matter, the fallback he had prepared was just one move: no response, strict confidentiality. The Alliance's security work for Wu Jiarong's research institute was elevated to the highest level, even stricter than the security for Gu Heng himself. The only living person allowed to access the black box, apart from Wu Jiarong, was nobody else. Servo-servants don't count as people, and they wouldn't reveal secrets. As for how the Alliance developed and pulled off so much technology, you can guess that on your own. Guess whatever you like, but if you want to come up with evidence, you're dreaming. As for outright inspection, Mr. Gu would firmly refuse in his capacity as planetary governor. Imperial law grants the planetary governor all powers on his own planet, so of course, Mr. Gu had the right to do so. Of course, this so-called power needed to be backed by strength. Mr. Gu's future goal was to ensure he had the strength to do so, preventing entities from the Star Sector government to the Tribunal and Mechanical Church from forcefully conducting inspections. Without concrete evidence, it's challenging to create trouble through official means. Without evidence, merely a suspicion makes it difficult for certain powers to take significant action. Of course, before Mr. Gu developed to a certain extent, there wasn't too much need to worry about this issue. It's still that old metaphor: when he was still an ant nest, no one cared about what happened in the ant nest, let alone thinking that the infinitely precious black boxes would be piled high inside it. Honestly, other possibilities are much more plausible than Mr. Gu has a system that can produce a bunch of black boxes at will. As for using the tech tree more cautiously in the future, Mr. Gu did not plan to do that. The things that need to be cautious and kept secret, of course, must be done with all effort. But to say that for the sake of confidentiality, he would slow down his own development pace, Mr. Gu was not going to do that. That would be sacrificing the essential for the sake of the trivial. As for the present, with Hu Kei's request, Mr. Gu had a rough idea of what he wanted to say when he anticipated it earlier. He spread his hands to Hu Kei and said honestly, "Mr. Hu, I understand your curiosity about the Alliance Research Institute. There lies the core of the Alliance's technological output, containing the core secrets. I too wish you could join there. You would learn many secrets, which would greatly benefit you. But please allow me to be frank, to ensure the secrets don't get leaked, I need every person joining the Institute to be trustworthy enough. Mr. Hu, you still need to pass a period of testing. Perhaps a visit to the Loyal Air Academy is necessary. Additionally, also in the interest of keeping secrets, once you join the Research Institute, you will lose a lot. Your movements might be restricted, and your actions might have to be reported, subject to close surveillance. The time you spend with your family will also be reduced." At this point, Mr. Gu opened his arms, looking Hu Kei in the eye as he spoke, "You may need to consider this matter carefully." After listening, Hu Kei indeed hesitated. He hadn't even considered the black boxes. His biggest suspicion was merely that the Research Institute contained many technical blueprints obtained by the Gu family, such as various technologies for weapons and the construction of production materials, all achieved through the replication of technical blueprints. What he wanted were those. Studying those technical blueprints would greatly improve his level. Still, he quite understood the reasons Mr. Gu expressed for keeping secrets. The price of undergoing strict surveillance, being cautious even when with family, was something he found hard to accept. "There's no rush," Mr. Gu said, "you can make this choice at any time, you don't need to give me an answer right now." "Thank you, Mr. Governor, I will consider the whole matter carefully." After the conversation, Mr. Gu boarded the Wind Falcon and returned to Revival City. There, his loyal subordinates had many things to report to him. But before that, he needed to tend to some other matters. The nearly 20,000 points of grace he had at his disposal had to be spent. Chapter 443 Gu Hang currently has a total of over 17,000 grace points at his disposal. With such an amount of grace points, Gu Hang could do many things. The first thing to be done was military construction. At present, the total strength of the Alliance army was about 330,000, with 38 division and brigade level units, divided into several group armies, deployed in different places to perform different tasks. He had calculated that, according to the standard of imperial tax, the total value of these 38 divisions, if all at full strength, would be about 6 million tax currency. That was the combined value of both people and equipment. Moreover, Gu Hang had already obtained permission to establish a Star Realm Army Corps at Rage Owl Star. The authorization had even been issued. The designation was Corps 43.25.09.03. This string of numbers was quite interesting. 43 was the code for the Eastern Cosmos domain, 25 was the code for the Dragonhawk Star domain, 09 was the code for the Tianma Star sector, 03 was for Rage Owl Star. Put together, this was the administrative code for Rage Owl Star at the Empire's administrative department. For another example, the human ancestral star, the imperial capital, Holy Terra, is 01.01.01.01, Sun Zhou domain, Sun Star domain, Sun Star sector, Holy Terra. If the last number changes to 2, it would be Foundry World Mars, which is the headquarters of the Mechanical Cult Guild, also known as Mars. The Star Realm Army also liked to do this. Whatever planet was the main source of recruitment for the newly formed Corps, that planet's code would be given to the Corps. Of course, this method of addressing was very cumbersome. With too many, you just couldn't remember them all, so it was generally only used in internal documents. Gu Hang could choose his own name for the Corps and report it. Generally speaking, the Star Domain military headquarters would not fuss over this and would allow it. Gu Hang came up with a very simple name, Rage Bear Legion. There was a high likelihood of duplication of names, which was normal. But duplication was not a problem, as long as the identification number was correct. Whether it was requesting supplies or issuing orders, as long as it was an official document, a unique identification number would be attached to ensure that there were no mistakes due to language differences, duplication, etc. The Star Realm army that Gu Hang was tasked to create was required to have a total value of over 2.5 million tax currency, which was 2 years of imperial tax for Rage Owl Star. In principle, the tax amount should be 10 million. The remaining 7.5 million, according to what was said before Gu Hang's arrival, was to be paid by the Star Sector government. With the goal of creating an army worth 2.5 million tax currency, and the total value of the Alliance army being over 6 million, Gu Hang definitely wouldn't transfer all of the troops into it. Even if the Star Realm army would be under his control, with positions from officers to corps commander appointed by Gu Hang, and could be permanently stationed on Rage Owl Star under the pretext of guarding against a potential attack from the green Skin Orcs, ensuring the stability of Rage Owl Star. Despite this, Gu Hang still had to be cautious. After all, this troop would still be under the unified command of the Imperial Star Realm Army. If an official order came through sending them off to fight somewhere, they would have to go, wouldn't they? It wouldn't be possible to defy orders. There were benefits, though. Firstly, there was the tax credit. And secondly, it was still the tax credit. However, even the method of tax credit could vary. After establishing this troop, the immediate tax credit of 2.5 million in tax payments was one aspect. In the future, whether it was for expanding the troop or routine maintenance, the Alliance would not need to pay out of its own pocket any longer. If permission was obtained for expansion, and if the new troops were transported by the Military Affairs Department from outside, that would be one thing. But if they were recruited and bought from Rage Owl Star, then that would also be a tax credit. For day-to-day military maintenance, such as equipment depreciation, ammunition replenishment, personnel replenishment, the Military Affairs Department and Star Realm Army would foot the bill. Of course, in reality, it would not be feasible to transport troops and equipment from far-off worlds, so Rage Owl Star would still need to provide for them. And all these expenses could also be used as a tax credit. When calculated, the annual maintenance cost of an army with a total value of 2.5 million tax currency would also have to be around 250,000 tax currency provided there wasn't a major war. If there were a fierce war with substantial losses of equipment and personnel, replenishing those would entail extra costs. From an economic standpoint, planning to reassign a portion of the Alliance army into the Star Realm Army Rage Bear Legion, in itself, wasn't a losing business. As for how much control Gu Hang could exert over the Rage Bear Legion, that was an added bonus. Gu Heng planned to incorporate 13 divisions into this legion. They were the 3rd Beast Slaying Brigade, the 11th and 12th Infantry Divisions, 14th Infantry Division, 26th to 30th Infantry Divisions, 31st Airborne Division, 32nd and 33rd Infantry Divisions, 35th Mechanized Brigade. The total strength of the army was 140,000 people, nearly half the force of the Alliance Army. However, the number of crucial mechanized brigades included was small, only one. An infantry division with 12,000 people cost only 200,000 tax currency to form. A fully staffed mechanized brigade had less than 9,000 people, but its cost soared straight to 460,000 tax currency. To assemble these 13 divisions, Gu Heng had essentially dismantled and merged the group army that was previously used to recover the North Territory and the central group army that had been used to pacify the eastern provinces. The 13 divisions had already received their orders. They would assemble and station near the capital, Revival City, to await inspection by the imperial tax officers arriving 2 months later. Considering this, Gu Heng scratched his head, feeling that he still needed to expand the military further. After allocating the Rage Bear Legion, the number of troops under the Alliance Army was a bit insufficient. Gu Heng had several plans moving forward. Firstly, he wanted to establish the Eastern Group Army. The manpower for this part of the army was already available. They were militias established on site by Yan Fangxiu after pacifying the eastern provinces, stationed locally, totaling about 100,000 people. Chapter 444. Plain text. Gu Heng planned to reorganize half of the forces on the spot into the 39th to 45th Divisions, adopting the formation of a garrison division with 6,260 troops each. Not even armored vehicles were needed. Arming them with a large number of motorcycles and iron bull trucks for motorization was sufficient. The reorganization of these 7 garrison divisions was expected to be done within a month, as production and distribution of too much new equipment was not required. There was a substantial existing inventory of artillery, trucks, and individual soldier equipment. As for the troops' training, it was a matter of Gu Heng clicking in the army badge system a few grace points spent, 1 point for 100 men, not expensive at all. Afterwards, he would reorganize the other half into regular forces, forming 5 divisions. Divisions 46 and 47 would follow the organization of a mechanized brigade, while divisions 48 to 50 would follow that of an infantry division. These 5 divisions wouldn't be ready immediately. Though the training of troops was quick, a large amount of equipment for these 5 divisions needed extra production. Various armored vehicles, tanks, and regimental firefighting heavy artillery. The military logistics department's inventory was seriously inadequate, even in arrears. Especially in the case of armored vehicles and tanks. Currently, the monthly production capacity of the Alliance Army's Lion tanks reached 34 units, and for armored vehicles, 160 units. These were the 2 most critical pieces of equipment hindering the land forces' construction. Not just the newly established forces, but even the old mechanized brigades that theoretically should have a complete complement of 50 tanks per brigade hadn't been fully equipped. Except for the 1st Extinguishing Wind Brigade, which had added an extra tank battalion to become fully equipped, the 35th Brigade intended to be incorporated into the Rage Bear Legion was the next in line to be prioritized for completion. The rest of the mechanized brigades each generally had only 18 tanks. If Gu Heng wanted to create a true surge of steel, he needed to find ways to increase the production of tanks and armored vehicles. And that was already underway. On the one hand, Wuxing City was always striving to expand its production capacity, on the other hand, the continuously constructed production lines were spilling over to surrounding provinces. Aside from alleviating the production pressure of Wuxing City, the aim was also to drive the production level in other provinces, solving employment issues, and harnessing the potential of human resources. This initiative was already in motion. These areas had also started setting up some heavy and military industry factories. For example, areas in the central province took on a number of individual soldier equipment manufacturing plants and various types of construction machinery manufacturing. Jeoda province undertook a vehicle parts production plant and began building their own car manufacturing plant on the spot, with armored vehicle production lines also in place. And the central North province, in particular, is worth mentioning. Originally, it was the province with the least population within the Alliance's administrative divisions. However, after the North Territory was liberated, a considerable amount of land and population were allocated to the central North province, with the rest establishing the northern border province. Inheriting many of the assets of the Polar Industrial Group, even the Polar Industrial City became part of central North province and was renamed Guangbei City. The related technical industry upgrades have been making considerable progress lately. The Central North Province can now produce tanks. This model had long been considered by Gu Heng. First, establish the Wuxing City Industrial Center, then use the wealth of the early winners to drive the prosperity of the later ones, radiating to surrounding areas. Other regions were first positioned as suppliers of consumer goods, food, and raw materials, and later gradually took on the extra production capacity. Now, the second step had already been reached. With the industrialization efforts of all parties continuously advancing, the industrial capability of the alliance will undoubtedly maintain high growth for the following period, even possibly higher than in the past. If calculated by the increase in production capacity before, the 5 divisions belonging to the Central Group Army, particularly the 2 mechanized brigades, could complete their preparations in approximately 3 months. If the expansion of productive capacity is more ideal, then this time could possibly be shortened to within 2 months. Training these troops, aside from solving the weaponry and equipment issues, the other concern was training the soldiers. The current militia units established in the eastern provinces lacked formal organization and had not undergone training with grace points. 2 armies in total, adding about 100,000 new personnel, plus the first phase of the expeditionary force dispatched to Hajian Star that came back crippled, which includes the 34th Infantry Division, the 37th and the 38th Mechanical Brigades, also require replenishment of troops. These 3 divisions alone had direct personnel losses nearing 20,000. Along with the fallen, there were also many disabled, who were brought back and processed for retirement. The gap of 20,000 personnel will also be filled in this military buildup. For these 3 divisions, compensations for the dead and disabled were one aspect. On the other hand, in keeping with his promise, Gu Heng commended these 3 divisions with collective third-class merit. All units down to the company level from these 3 divisions were allowed to affix a symbol of a single sword behind a shield on their banners and unit arm patches, a mark of honor. Certain companies even received collective second-class merit. Some combat heroes, whether alive or deceased, disabled or intact, also received individual medals. Collective medals were all well and good as a bonus for the soldiers, mainly reflecting on the unit's honor. Individual medals were extremely valuable. This signified the alliance's recognition of their meritorious service. As long as they did not commit crimes in the future, these medal recipients could receive a lifelong, though not large, very decent and supplemental allowance. Meanwhile, nearly all personnel who participated in the combat were rapidly promoted in military rank, with a large number of them being appointed as officers. With these advancements in rank, and even some warriors being commissioned as officers, there was also a promotion in their duties. Platoon leaders were promoted to company leaders to battalion leaders, and there were even those who became regiment leaders. Even if the original units couldn't accommodate so many officers, it didn't matter. The 12 newly established divisions had a large number of officer vacancies, which allowed for these individuals to be transferred out and replenished within these units. In order to train these troops, Gu Heng spent 1,200 points on grace points. This was not considered a large amount. As long as one doesn't engage in creating an army of 1 million people, the grace points spent on training troops are generally not too high. After planning the grace points for troop training, Gu Heng was left with over 16,000 grace points in hand. After some thought, he decided to use them for drawing technology. He could draw at the 10,000 level, but there was no need. The greatest value of the 10,000 level technology tree mainly comes from a 25% chance to draw an epic level technology. But even if he drew an epic level technology, it might be too advanced for current Rage Owl Star's industrial level to assimilate. Moreover, he hadn't exhausted the 1000 grace point tier technology pool yet. Although there was a 57.5% chance of drawing nothing at this level, he could try a few more times. He decided to go for a 6 times draw. The first draw resulted in nothing, as did the second, the third drew a basic level, the fourth drew an advanced level, the fifth drew nothing, the sixth was another basic level. The 2 basic levels were the HS-6 electromagnetic gun family and cannon retrofit technologies. Both were relatively ordinary, without any significant changes. Electromagnetic rifles and laser guns are highly interchangeable, with similar power, performance, and cost. The main difference lies in their performance against different enemies. Generally, mature and elite-level Star Realm armed forces units would be broadly equipped with both types of rifles. G-series bullet rifles would be completely phased out and reserved for regular Star Realm troops. But for Rage Owl Star, this is more of a technical reserve. The cost of a complete set of either laser guns or electromagnetic rifles, with all the accompanying individual equipment, is 4 tax currency, a G9 set only costs 0.2 tax currency. There's quite a price gap. Gu Heng can't afford to produce them for the time being. However, the cannon technology was powerful. Even the standard 155 howitzer, when compared to one retrofitted, showed significant differences in range and power. Especially in terms of range, it could reach up to 40 kilometers, doubling the distance. At the same time, for some smaller caliber artillery, such as the 88 howitzers and the 60 mortars, power, range, and stability would all be enhanced. This was excellent, a tangible enhancement to the Alliance army. The advanced level technology, on the other hand, made Gu Heng even happier. Traveler Class Starship. Chapter 445. At present, Rage Owl Star's technological capabilities in basic ground force infrastructure are probably quite complete. While not incredibly exquisite, and far from the most advanced equipment, at least all conventional military gear can be self-produced. The Air Force has Wind Falcons leading the charge, which is passable, at least providing air-to-ground support, air dropping, and airborne operations when needed. However, construction in space had not even begun up until now. And the Traveler is a great start. Similar in size to the Type V landing craft, if one considers the troops and their equipment, it can carry up to 500 people at once, or fit in a tank if fewer people are on board, roughly equivalent to the forces of a battalion. Actually, the technology used in both is quite similar. They have armor of comparable thickness, and the weaponry is almost the same, able to mount several reflector laser cannons. If one insists on using solid projectile cannons, that's fine too. Its firepower is stronger than the Wind Falcon, but only by a limited margin. However, the key difference lies in the fact that the Traveler has the capability for interstellar travel, able to cross through star gates and traverse the Star Realm tunnel for interstellar voyages on its own. To achieve crossing through the Star Realm, the Traveler is equipped with 3 technologies not found in normal landing craft: warp engine, jump recognition system, and starfield force field. The warp engine provides the power to enter a warp state. Lower-tier engines can't supply this energy output. The jump recognition system is for finding, positioning, and docking with star gates. The starfield force field provides extra protection for the entire ship during warp, safeguarding against spiritual energy and low-energy effects, ensuring the cruise mines remain undamaged and unwarped. All 3 are indispensable. But regrettably, the Alliance currently has none of them. Moreover, Gu Heng suspects that the technology to produce these 3 necessities is not just at an advanced level, but may well require elite level. But the good news is, while they cannot be mass-produced, the black box can directly extrude all the main components of the spacecraft, and then it's just a matter of technicians building a block puzzle. Of course, counting on the Traveler to build an actual naval force in the Star Realm is nonsense. The difference in levels is too great. The warp engines, jump recognition, and protective field equipped on the Traveler are all very small. Its weapons, when up against large starships, are like scratching an itch, and its own defense would shatter under a single salvo. Only the poorest Star Realm pirates would take this thing and make extreme modifications, employing swarm tactics in plain terms. Providing enough fodder to capture attention and create opportunities for their main ships would be considered a success. Its usual application is for carrying passengers and a small amount of cargo for Star Realm travel. If used for war, then it's for harassment, reconnaissance, and the like. Small size, low single-trip flight cost, flexibility, and low production cost are its advantages. Of course, low production cost is relative to those starships which can cost hundreds of millions. Its own production cost is estimated to be around 1.6 million tax currency each. Still, they need to be built. It's not sufficient to form a proper navy, but at least it's the first step for the Alliance towards the Star Sea. Moreover, it's not without significance. Inside the planet, it can provide the Alliance with the ability to deploy military forces at any point on Rage Owl Star, around the clock. In wartime, the ability to deploy an armored battalion anywhere on the planet within a short time frame could still yield a significant advantage. And on Rage Owl Star, Gu Heng is not without enemies anymore. The easy targets have mostly been dealt with, but on the western part of the continent, there's still Blackbird Heavy Industries, which can't be seen as a local power. This is a group backed by the Fatches family, or to put it bluntly, an enterprise of the Fatches family. Although the waters between the two sides have been clear so far, Gu Heng as the planetary governor, can hardly accept the existence of such a large, uncontrollable force on his own planet. And he hasn't forgotten that according to the request of the star sector leaders, he has to turn against Blackbird Heavy Industries. But no specific time was given for this, and Gu Heng was not planning to act on it immediately. He just needed to be prepared in case action becomes necessary, as even if Gu Heng does not make the first move, they might sense something is amiss and cause trouble ahead of time. Using the Traveler's capabilities for rapid global deployment could have a great effect in this potential conflict. Moreover, besides the planet itself, the star realm travel provided by the Traveler would facilitate communication between Rage Owl Star and Hagian Star. The exchange of personnel, dispatch of administrative officials, and so on would all be much more convenient. Although he could probably rely on the trade fleets of the Gu family for this in the future, it's best not to inconvenience others too much. This others is not just a polite expression by Gu Heng. Even if he becomes the family head of the Gu family in the future, the Gu clan operates somewhat like a franchise. In the 14 fleets, now only 12 remain. Gu Investment Company, established by the main branch of the Gu clan, holds shares in all of them, to varying degrees. Only 5 of them have reached absolute control, the remaining 7 will follow the unified orders of the Gu commercial firm, arrange together, and make money together. They are not employees of the Gu family, nor are they vassals, they cannot be used at will. Chapter 446. With the presence of spacefarers, similar tasks had become more convenient. Of course, there was a safety issue. The combat capability of spacefarers was quite weak, and encountering space pirates would still pose a significant danger. However, the journey from Rage Owl Star to Hagian Star wasn't situated along a bustling shipping lane and lacked attractive targets. Pirates were reluctant to waste their time in such an area, which made this particular issue less troubling. In the future, if the number of spacefarers increased, say, to over 20, then the number of personnel they could transport at one time could reach tens of thousands, barely sufficient for deploying troops between stars. But hoping to produce over 20 vessels purely by leveraging black boxes was a bit unrealistic. Currently, using only black boxes, it was estimated that a spacefarer could only be produced every 4 months. The main issue was that these things were quite large, and there was no black box big enough to produce an entire one at once. In reality, it was about assembling various components module by module. Still, just like all black box products, the assembly difficulty of these parts was very low and could be handled by an ordinary technician. The production speed of these individual parts from the black boxes was quite limited, moreover, assembly also took time. This resulted in a 4-month period to assemble a spacefarer. Gu Heng estimated that if they later acquired technology for real starships, even those that ignored prerequisite technologies and could directly produce finished products from black boxes, the production cycle would probably still be measured in years. Creating them was definitely still necessary. Even if one took 4 months to produce a single spacefarer, using it purely for tax payment would still bring in 1.8 million tax currency, 3 a year meant more than 5 million, enough to cover Rage Owl Star's annual imperial tax. The key point was that this was essentially free money. Of course, Gu Heng hadn't worried about imperial tax for a long time. With the alliance's current situation, they could easily afford it. Gu Heng had 10,000 points of grace left, and after some thought, he resisted the temptation of the 10,000 tier. Mainly because the 1,000 tier hadn't been fully exploited yet. Though its cost effectiveness had diminished. At present, the chances for the 1,000 tier had already fallen to a 67.5% probability of yielding nothing, 10% for basic level, 20% for advanced level, and 2.5% for elite level. Even if the odds didn't drop further, a 10 pull would on average yield only 3 pieces of technology, which were likely to be advanced or basic level, and there was no guarantee an elite level would be drawn. By comparison, technology drawn from the 10,000 tier was more likely to be good but unusable. It was better to draw from the current prize pool first. So, he went for another 10 pull. His luck could be considered quite good this time, as he only got 3 pieces of technology, but one was elite level, and the other 2 were all advanced level, with no basic level items drawn. The 2 advanced levels were gravity weapons and sentinel mecha, the elite level was Star Realm protective field. Getting gravity weapons left Gu Heng somewhat frustrated. This was a special class of personal weapons. Priest Rizzo's scepter belonged to this category, which essentially meant anything fitted with this device would become heavier. There were too few uses for it, and it was even possible to purchase it. Making it oneself was ideal, but spending a precious technology slot on it might have a greater impact if used for something else. Sentinel mecha was similarly disappointing. In Hajian Star, Gu Heng had witnessed the abilities of the Sentinel Mecha, which were just mediocre. During a plain field battle, it was far less effective than the Lion tank priced in the same range. The latter was bigger, had a thicker gun barrel, and was more durable and reliable in a pitched battle. On the other hand, the Sentinel Mecha was costly, lacked firepower, and had inadequate armor. Perhaps it just wasn't being used correctly. For instance, during boarding operations or counter-boarding scenarios inside a starship, Sentinel Mechas were much more valuable than Lion tanks. The latter couldn't move inside a starship and just had to stay put in storage as they were too big. In some infiltration operations, in complex terrains like mountains or swamps where a tank might not be able to go, Sentinel Mechas could move unhindered just like people. When the enemy attacked a certain mountain position and could only deploy infantry, and then encountered Sentinel Mechas on arrival, the situation became quite desperate. We can't use it as the main force for a decisive battle, but in certain special environments, it can play a role that tanks cannot. Although Gu Heng didn't really like it, he would still choose to produce some. It's like the gravity weapon, already drawn, what can you do about it? Just make it. Moreover, one advantage that sentry mechas have over gravity weapons is that they have a guaranteed market. In the cultural state of Hajian Star, so-called mechas are quite popular. Gu Heng can sell as many as he produces to those knights. As for the elite technology Star Realm protective field that was drawn, it's a truly usable but must have capacity to reserve. In the future production of starships, no matter the size, this is a necessary prerequisite technology for protecting the ships as they travel through the Star Realm tunnel. Let's just save it for now. After completing the technology draw, Gu Heng made a trip to Wuxing City. On one hand, he inspected the condition of the most important industrial core of the Alliance and, on the other hand, he went to the Research Institute to materialize the 6 technologies just acquired, comprising 12 black boxes, and handed them all over to Wu Jiarong. Wu Jiarong had grown numb to Mr. Gu delivering her a few black boxes every now and again. She simply couldn't keep up with the research. She used to think she was swimming in a sea of happiness. A few black boxes would be a lifetime blessing for any scholar of the sect of mechanics in their entire scientific career. However, she never imagined that one day she would be incredibly distressed by having too many black boxes. She was nearly drowned by them. But, it's a happy kind of trouble. Troubling as it may be, the main thing is that it's still happiness. She said to Mr. Gu, based on our current progress, I estimate that in another year, I could surpass the level of the Prophet of Engines and reach the level of Dominant Bishop. So soon? Gu Heng was somewhat surprised. A Dominant Bishop, in the sect of mechanics, counted as part of the upper echelon. Further up, one could obtain the title of Sage. Although only a principal sage, many leaders of the sect of mechanics foundry worlds were at this level. In response to Gu Heng's question, Wu Jiarong answered, there are too many black boxes. I gain new insights almost every day, it's impossible not to advance quickly. Gu Heng asked with a smile, do you want to go back then? Perhaps, after an assessment and a few research results are published, you could make a big name for yourself in one of the foundry worlds of the sect of mechanics, and then, you might really become a dominant bishop. Wu Jiarong shook her head. She was very self-aware. She knew that showing any desire to leave was very dangerous. Even a single black box would be a huge secret here, let alone so many. Moreover, even if Mr. Gu had a way to seal and cleanse memories, letting her leave with peace of mind, she wouldn't want to go. Reflecting on the past, she lamented, those years with the sect of mechanics were truly uninspiring. The endless scheming, the struggle for power and profit, I could have tolerated all of that without a clean research environment. But the scarcity of resources was really intolerable. Every bit of knowledge, opportunity, and research finding became capital in the struggle. Here, I've had the most comfortable and happiest 2 years, I really don't want to go back to the past. Gu Heng said with a smile, that's good. Don't worry. I have no thoughts of leaving. What does a dominant bishop count for anyway? Perhaps, in the future, I might also have the chance to reach the level of a principal sage, or even a great sage. I'm very much looking forward to that day, Gu Heng said sincerely. If we could really cultivate a sage on our home planet, it would be quite an invincible feat. Not to mention their scientific capabilities, at the level of sage, who isn't a top-notch combat force. Found a bug, the chainsaw sword was already drawn, so change the repetition to gravity weapon, which shouldn't affect the plot. Chapter 447. Gu Heng had some time, so he spoke with Wu Jiarong a bit more. Starting from the extremely fast progress that Wu Jiarong had made, he came up with another idea. If we send more people to join the research institute, I'm not talking about the periphery, but formally, like you, capable of researching the black box, wouldn't that make the entire alliance very strong in training scientific research personnel? In theory, yes, Wu Jiarong said, although I can share some of my research findings, and I've also established a research journal within the Technical Academy to speed up the training of technical personnel. Moreover, if these technical personnel were to participate in the black box research, and if they reached the same conclusions and results, it wouldn't be much help to their growth. But overall, we have too many black boxes here, and I simply can't study them all. Having more help would definitely be good. The only problem lies in keeping secrets. At that point, Gu Heng thought of Hu Ke. He would certainly be a good choice. But after all, he is an outsider, and still needs to be tested. Gu Heng said to Wu Jiarong, pick a few talented young people and bring them to meet me. Sure. Wu Jiarong was quite happy to have received permission. Indeed, there are a few good candidates. After they join, I will definitely pay attention to security issues regarding confidentiality. We can't relax here. While saying so, Gu Heng also made plans for a double layer of assurance. Later, he met the 3 young men and 1 woman that Wu Jiarong had selected. Gu Heng chatted with them, which was basically like an interview. During the interview, he casually used his mental manipulation, making some adjustments. He tried his best to avoid abusing this ability. However, when it came to the secrets of the black box, he had to be cautious. He would not overly interfere with their minds, just adding a layer of mental maze lock which would prevent the participants from leaking any information. Next, Wu Jiarong would take these young people, who were actually at most the level of technical staff, into the real gates of the research institute. They were confused and had no idea of the grand hall they were about to enter. After finishing all this, Gu Heng hurriedly boarded the Wind Falcon and embarked on the journey back to Revival City. There, many of the Alliance's high-ranking officials had already gathered together. Gu Heng had to meet individually with Ozania, Lambert, Tadeus, and others, listen to their recent work reports, then preside over a work meeting facing many high-ranking Alliance officials. The content of Tadeus's report was quite routine, related to military construction matters. During the entire reporting process, it was mainly Gu Heng talking while he listened. Gu Heng had plans to build the Rage Bear Legion, in preparation for its eventual incorporation into the Star Realm Army. Moreover, the new Eastern Group Army and Central Group Army also required Tadeus's attention. After receiving instructions from the governor, Tadeus hurried off. Mobilizing troops, forming the Rage Bear Legion, reorganizing 12 divisions from the militia groups in the 3 eastern provinces, these were all considered major actions, and he had many busy days ahead. Afterward, there was a lot to discuss with Ozania. The Alliance Premier went into detail about the current development status of the Alliance. Currently, within the Alliance's control, there were 25 million people, divided into 8 provinces. By estimation, the Alliance's total GDP for the year reached 34.14 million tax currency. Under this premise, the Alliance's per capita welfare and allowances totaled a consumption of 10 million tax currency, administrative costs, developmental reinvestment, military-industrial supply for the troops, all adding up to a consumption of 23 million tax currency, leaving an alliance budget surplus of around 1 million tax currency. Of course, this so-called tax currency is actually a statistical methodology, and the currency issued internally by the alliance is another matter. Many of the investments and welfare are not issued in currency but are given in the form of goods. Another point that must be mentioned is that these are the normal economic production conditions within the alliance and do not include the outputs of the Wuxing City Research Institute. The outputs of the Research Institute cannot be calculated. There are both direct outputs of various military products and the construction of numerous production lines, which are of extraordinary value. Actually, if the outputs of the Research Institute were included, the Alliance's expenditure in industrial production reinvestment would be much higher than the apparent figures. In terms of outputs, unexpectedly, the province with the highest GDP in the Alliance was not the anticipated Wuxing City Industrial Center, but the Biking Valley Province. The main reason was that the natural environment of Biking Valley Province was too good. Possessing the second largest area of land in the whole Alliance, this place could be called a land of 1,000 miles of fertile soil. Correspondingly, the largest in terms of area was the northern border province, but the land there was extremely barren. The disparity between the two was quite significant. Similarly, Viking Valley Province had a population of 8 million, accounting for 1/3 of the entire alliance. The most fertile land, the second largest area, the largest population, these factors created the highest GDP province in the entire alliance. Moreover, not just in total volume, but also in per capita GDP, it was the highest. It was even higher than the per capita GDP of Wixing. This was mainly because, after a large number of agricultural machines were produced and sent to Wixing, the land there was utilized very effectively. 8 million people spread out over those vast fertile lands, driving farming machines, each household tending hundreds of acres of land, using genetically improved seeds, and with industrial fertilizers providing a boost, the productivity could not be low. Chapter 448. The Viking Valley region has already put into use 200 million acres of farmland, and along with the service industry, transportation, fertilizer, and food processing industries that have stemmed from agricultural production, the per capita annual output value has reached 2.3 tax currency. By contrast, Wixing City's per capita output currently stands at only 1.95 tax currency, and the population is just 2.55 million, a little short of the 5 million annual output target. This is the origin of the disparity between the two. Of course, when looking at development, you can't just look at money. The main produce of Viking Valley Province is agricultural, primarily grains, with various other types of economic crops supplementing it. These goods are solid currency, whether they are consumed domestically, used as agricultural exports in trade, or even used to pay taxes, the prices are very stable. However, relying on agriculture alone will not make you rich, nor can it cultivate a reliable army. Moreover, large-scale agricultural production fundamentally relies on land, a resource with a limit. Although currently, a large amount of farmland in the Green Valley region has not been put to use. According to estimates, the viable farming area of Viking Valley region could reach up to 1.2 billion acres. Furthermore, the southern Green Valley is still undeveloped, and if it were to be fully developed, it could provide no less than 700 million acres of arable land. But ultimately, there is a limit to this. However, industrial mass production has no limit. As time progresses, the per capita output of Wixing City will have even more room for growth. Furthermore, according to the plans of Prime Minister Ozania and Wixing City's Mayor Patel, construction in Wixing City is set to accelerate in the following year. Wixing City's population growth has already been rapid. In 2 years, it developed from an empty plain into an industrial city of 2.5 million people today. But it can be even faster. The constraints on further population growth are the expansion of industrial lines and the construction of urban infrastructure. In this area, they expect to solidify the foundation within half a year. Afterward, in the span of 1 year, they plan to double the industrial population of Wixing City again. In such a case, Wixing City's industrial output value should be able to catch up with Viking Valley region's agricultural output. Of course, no matter what, the Viking Valley region and Wixing City are currently the core sources of output for the alliance. Combined, they account for over 67% of the alliance's total output value. The remaining provinces are lagging behind. Apart from Revival City, the capital, which barely reached an annual per capita output of 1 tax currency, the rest did not even reach 1. The poorest among them is the newly reclaimed Northern Border Province. Since the extreme north industrial city was assigned to Central North Province and Polar Industrial Group's main production capacity was moved during the administrative division, Northern Border Province, despite having the alliance's largest land area and a population of 3 million, has a per capita annual output value of only 0.34. Let alone the future investments and construction that the alliance plans to carry out there, just those more than 3 million people, based on the alliance's welfare and allowance policies, with a per capita cost of 0.4 tax currency, it's a loss-making business. It's not much better in other areas either, even if they don't lose money on welfare allowances, when you factor in the tax contributions, they don't make much of a profit. Add to that the investment in construction, and most of it is pure loss. However, as the saying goes, in construction, you can't just look at the money, this isn't about doing business. Despite its harsh natural environment, the Northern Border Province has mines. Exploration teams using resource exploration technology, who have been working throughout the Alliance territories, have discovered 3 different types of ore veins in the Northern Border Province just in the past month. Plus, with the numerous mining ruins left over from before the war, it may potentially become the Alliance's most important mining resource area in the future. The Xianja Province in the eastern 3 provinces, leveraging Starport, has already found its development path. The other two provinces are somewhat behind but are also trying to find solutions, and at the very least, they have ruins within their territories to clear. The pre-war nest capital has enough debris to provide for many years to come. Before it is completely exhausted, they have plenty of time to find a way out. Jeoda Province, Central North Province, and other areas of the Central Province are trying to absorb the spillover industries from Wuxing City, hoping to form a large industrial circle centered around Wuxing City. Everyone has a bright future. In the end, Ozania summarized, in the next 2-year plan, what I hope to achieve is to double the alliance's total output value. Even in the poorest provinces, the per capita output should exceed 1. Gu Heng gently clapped. He was mostly satisfied with Ozania's report. Could one ask for more? Actually, since its establishment, the alliance had only just gone through 2 years. Wuxing City was built from scratch, Viking Valley had only been reclaimed for just over a year, the 3 eastern provinces were recovered less than a year ago, the North Territory had been reclaimed just 1 month ago. In such circumstances, to have developed to this point, the golden finger that Gu Heng brought with him through time travel, which was devoid of reason, was certainly the most significant factor. However, Ozania, as the chief steward of the whole alliance government, played a role that could not be overlooked due to the arduous work she had put in. In the midst of applause, Gu Heng opened the character interface. He could see that Ozania's character information had quietly upgraded from R to SR level. At the same time, beside her LV3, there was an option to upgrade. Without hesitation, Gu Heng clicked on the upgrade. Ozania became an LV4 governor. Furthermore, she could continue upgrading. She had indeed accumulated a lot of experience in this position. However, Gu Heng no longer had enough blessing points in hand. He only had 194 points left, which was not enough to meet the 500 points required for an LV4 character to upgrade to LV5. But it didn't matter, after the following payday, Gu Heng would not hesitate to give Ozania another level up. Currently, Gu Heng's monthly blessing income had reached 3,522 points. Of this, the alliance provided 3,178 points, and the remaining 344 were provided by the Lumen Kingdom through the vassal system. It was quite sentimental. In the past, after a battle, earning 1,000 or 2 blessing points felt like striking it rich, as the monthly blessing points were not very substantial and were rather insignificant. But now, it seemed that while fighting could lead to sudden wealth, the daily accumulation from farming should not be neglected either. 10,000 blessing points were merely a matter of lying in bed for 3 months. The most up-to-date noves are published on Fruitnoelo. Nothing to speak of. Moreover, this monthly blessing point income would continue to grow as the alliance expanded. After meeting with Ozania, Gu Heng then met with Lambert. The matters he mentioned were mainly threefold. One was the construction of the legal system within the alliance's territory, which was advancing normally. Whether it was criminal law, civil law, or the like, Gu Heng had reviewed them quite seriously. The legal system was, of course, very important. The second matter was the result of the anti-corruption campaign that started in the Viking Valley province and gradually extended to the entire alliance. A considerable number of alliance officials were purged and held accountable. The majority of the trouble came from those officials who had transitioned from the original ruling class. The alliance had already given them an opportunity, but they did not seize it, therefore, the alliance was not to blame for taking stringent measures. There were relatively few death sentences, and those who were sentenced were transformed into servitor skulls or automata. To make full use of them, most were subjected to labor sentences, with lighter cases supplemented by imprisonment and demotion. One should not think that labor sentences were light. A 10-year labor sentence was truly worse than a straightforward execution. The alliance was not yet wealthy enough or advanced enough to consider or improve the working conditions for prisoners with labor sentences. Generally, those sentenced to 10 years of labor did not survive that long. In fact, the Servant Management Bureau and the Servo Skull Studio had visited Lambert, the Chief Justice, several times, hoping that he would pass heavier sentences in the future. A 10-year labor sentence, when the person doesn't survive 10 years, why bother? An execution would be more straightforward and provide them with materials to make servo skulls and automata. Those creations could serve far longer than 10 years. Lambert said that he was carefully considering the matter. Chapter 449. Regarding the increase in death penalties, Gu Heng was somewhat hesitant. He even thought he was being a bit too merciful. But he truly didn't want to sign more death warrants just to increase the raw materials for servo skulls and servo mechanisms. He didn't think it was an appropriate way to go about things. However, upon reflection, he considered it not a big deal. So, he proposed his thoughts to Lambert. On one hand, we need to improve the mortality rate of penal labor. Said Gu Hang, I know we can't invest a lot of resources in improving the living conditions of the prisoners. They are criminals, sent to serve, not to enjoy themselves. Every resource of the Alliance is valuable now, and improving the humane treatment of the criminals is not a priority yet. However, you need to address the corruption of the prison guards and labor overseers. The problem of withholding prisoner entitlements and deliberately mistreating them should be clearly eradicated. That's different from improving the treatment of penal laborers. I agree to substantially reduce the number of 10-year servitudes. Let's be clear about one thing, if someone truly commits heinous crimes, deserving death, then we issue the death penalty and the disposal of the body is a separate matter. But if we don't wish for their death and hope they can reintegrate into society after serving and being reformed, then we should try to sentence them to 5 years or less as much as possible, rather than aggressively pushing them towards death. Lambert nodded as he listened. That could work out well. In the future, the number of 10-year servitudes is expected to drop to a fifth of what it used to be. Half of the serious offenders would be directly sentenced to death to become serval-skulls or servomechanisms, and for the lesser crimes, just hand down lighter sentences to give them a chance at life. Otherwise, with the penal laborers dying from overwork every day, he would face a lot of criticism. On the other hand, the servomechanism and skull workshops would lack enough materials and also grumble at him. After discussing the prisoner's situation, they returned to the main topic of anti-corruption. The large number of officials being dismounted actually demonstrates that the Alliance's integrity efforts are not up to snuff. There are indeed historical remnants of original rulers who, after transforming in situ, found their bad habits hard to shun, but the decay of government is always a big issue to be vigilant about. However, there is also good news. The number of Alliance officials who graduated from Loyal Air Academy is increasing. And among those involved in Lambert's anti-corruption campaign, those with experiences from Loyal Air Academy have a much lower probability of having issues compared to transformed officials. The large number of positions cleared out through the anti-corruption campaign, once taken over by these newcomers, could relatively alleviate the corruption issues. Of course, on this premise, another problem might need consideration: political stability. Keeping the bunch from the original ruling class was initially for smooth transition of power. Plus, these individuals were indeed the most capable found at that time, best fitting and understanding the local circumstances, hence they were chosen. Now, with the sudden replacement by public servants cultivated by the Alliance itself, some turmoil is inevitable. On the one hand, those with hidden agendas might cause trouble, as those dismounted officials might have considerable influence in their hometowns. On the other hand, these officials dispatched from the Alliance's central government must perform exceptionally well and quickly manage the local situations to smoothly take over the governance. Still, overall, although no shortage of minor chaos has arisen, major incidents have not occurred. After all, the Alliance's policies are generally good, just having a steady job ensures a stable life, which is a fundamental tone that ensures no major disruptions can arise anywhere. Why? Who would want to return to those days of uncertainty and not being treated like a human instead of living stable lives? Most people are not foolish. And for that small number of people with ulterior motives, there's no need to worry. The Alliance has knives. It has armies to stabilize the situation, an integrity commission to conduct secret investigations, and if need be, the demon hunters might just knock on the door. They can't incite serious chaos, so let them make their petty moves in the shadows. Think of it as practice for the newly appointed officials. After finishing the discussion on anti-corruption, Lambert brought up a third matter. It was something related to intelligence. Previously, when the Demon Hunter organization was just established, we split the team into two. One team headed south to investigate the corruption case in Viking Valley Province, and the other was dispatched to the west, to collect intelligence on Blackbird Heavy Industries in the far west of the continent. The team heading west has great difficulty in maintaining contact with our headquarters here. Over the past year, communication has been sporadic, often losing contact, which is quite worrying. However, thankfully, after some time they always manage to re-establish contact and send back some intelligence. To date, by piecing together this intelligence, plus some leftover documents from the old Alliance, records of some elders, and narratives from traveling merchants, we have roughly pieced together what the far west of the continent is like. From the central province, westward, lies the West Desert region. That's where it's truly vast and sparsely populated. The expansive desert alone is as big as the 3 provinces of the central and 3 provinces of the eastern combined. Scattered oases sustain a limited population. However, that area was also an important food production site on Rage Owl Star in the past. The oases alone couldn't produce so much food, it was mainly due to the plantation factories left behind from the pre-war era beneath these oases. With only 5 million inhabitants in the entire West Desert region, naturally, there's a large amount of food that can be produced. However, the only thing the West Desert region can produce is food. It lacks other commodities on a significant scale and has no industrial capabilities, relying solely on food trading to acquire other necessities. Their main customer is Blackbird Heavy Industries, and only a few oases near the east trade with us. Beyond the West Desert region further west, lies the controlled territory of Blackbird Heavy Industries. That area is about half the size of the West Desert region, roughly the size of the 3 eastern provinces, and the natural environment is very similar, with pre-war urban agglomerations now nothing but ruins. Blackbird Heavy Industries is stationed there. 15 million people work for them, mostly engaged in low-end industries, from mining in the ruins, primary processing of raw materials, to concentrating on the few arable lands to provide food. And on the west coast, there is Blackbird City, the core industrial area of Blackbird Heavy Industries, with 7 million people gathered there. Blackbird City should be their hub of heavy industrial output, but its control is very strict. Our people have tried to enter several times and failed, those who went and never came out, nor did they send back any information. This massive city, like a black box, reveals nothing. They continue to attempt infiltration, hoping to obtain more core intelligence as soon as possible. Chapter 450. Island Bird looked up at the dark building in the rain ahead and, after a careful glance, he spotted a tiny sickle emblem. That somewhat reassured him. He pulled down the hood to shield from the rain and walked under the eaves. The most up-to-date novels are published on Fruit Noello. On the side, he found a small door and knocked 6 times, following a special rhythm. Only then did the door open a crack, revealing orange-yellow light. A child who looked no more than 5 or 6 years old timidly poked his head out from inside. One of his eyes was normal, but the other had had a large hole gouged in its socket and a mechanical eye inserted. The child looked up at Bird under the hood, his unfamiliar face prompting alert. He hurriedly tried to close the door, but Bird stopped it with his hand. How could a 5 or 6-year-old child have the strength to compete with an adult? With only a slight effort, Bird pushed the door open wide enough for him to slip through. He quickly sidled inside and promptly closed the door behind him. The child fell to the ground, looking at him with fear on his face, about to scream loudly, but Bird, who had quickly bent down, covered the boy's mouth. SHH. Silencing the child, Bird gestured for him to be quiet, but he only heard the click of a gun cocking behind him. Let him go. Bird stopped his movements. The child wriggled free and crawled behind the newcomer, hiding there and only showing his head, looking on fearfully. Island Bird raised his hands and said, "Calm down. Calm down. It's me. Bird." The person behind seemed to recognize his voice, yet wasn't entirely sure. "It's me, Tim, don't get excited," Island Bird said, turning around. He thought he would see a handsome face. Tim Winter was the best-looking one in their demon hunter squad. When they were together, they often teased him that he was too conspicuous to be a demon hunter working undercover. However, when he turned around and saw his teammate's face, he was taken aback. Gone was the handsome, dashing face, replaced by one full of scars. Only beneath those scars could Bird faintly make out the appearance of Tim Winter from his memory. "What happened to you?" Tim Winter slowly lowered his gun and sighed, "Bird, you shouldn't have come." "How could I not come? 5 of you entered Blackbird City, and then for more than a month, no news at all. We had an agreement to exchange information every week, but we waited a long time at the external information point and didn't get any message from you. Instead, we almost exposed ourselves to Blackbird Heavy Industries' security team. It's not that we didn't want to send information." Winter started to say but then stopped. First, he bent down and said something to the child behind him, allowing him to leave, then turned to Bird, "Come on, let's go to the back and rest. Have a cup of hot water, and then we can talk in detail." Island Bird and Tim Winter were both members of the Alliance Demon Hunter organization, and they could both be considered among the first batch of members. When the Demon Hunter organization was just established, 2 teams were recruited, one went south to fight corruption, and the other team, which included the two of them. They set off with a caravan, heading west, and had stayed for some time in several oasis settlements in the western desert, gathering some intelligence before continuing westward to the edge of the continent. Their ultimate goal was to collect intelligence about Blackbird Heavy Industries on this western side of the continent, striving to make preparations for the Alliance to liberate this planet's last piece of land. Now, the only enemy left for the Alliance on Rage Owl Star was Blackbird Heavy Industries. Those numerous desert oases in the western desert, those settlements built around pre-war plantation factories, hardly needed much attention. They had neither a unified organization nor sufficient military strength. After the bountiful harvest in the Green Valley region, even the strategic resource they once held dear, food, was no longer significant to the Alliance. The sole obstacle to reclaiming the western desert was the complicated and entangled relationship they had with Blackbird Heavy Industries. But once they reached the western edge of the continent, within the areas under Blackbird Heavy Industries' effective control, what they witnessed was starkly different from what they had imagined. The natural environment here was still harsh, and the people's lives were still quite difficult, not much better than those of the many settlements before liberation by the Alliance, and definitely not comparable to the living standards of an average E5 rank and above under the Alliance. However, unlike those settlements before their liberation by the Alliance, the western edge of the continent had a complete and unified system of rule and management. Based on what they had observed and experienced on this land for almost a year, they felt that Blackbird Heavy Industries was just a big corporation. Of course, they always had been, and the 15 million people living here were all employees of this company. Here there were strict hierarchical relationships, performance targets assigned to each individual, organizational structures divided by department, clear managerial levels. An order issued by Blackbird Heavy Industries headquarters, Blackbird City, could indeed be transmitted through the ranks to a specific individual. Blackbird Heavy Industries would issue its own internal currency as wages, paid to every individual. There was no base salary, just commission based on workload and performance. Similarly, they also established supply stations in various locations. Residents could use their wages to purchase their necessities for life. This social structure caused many difficulties for Bird and his fellow demon hunters, who were new to the area, in their intelligence gathering efforts. They were new faces in this huge company, where there was little contact between departments and interactions mostly involved familiar faces. Initially, they caused quite a few incidents, exposing their identities and being pursued as a consequence. But gradually, they quickly found some tricks. In the large corporation that was Blackbird Heavy Industries, there were common problems faced by many large organizations. There were too many people, making organization difficult, and it was hard for everyone to recognize each other. They relied more on identity badges and codes to identify each other. Ambush, capture, interrogation, torture. They obtained a lot of intelligence and gradually learned how to disguise themselves, starting to fit in like a fish takes to water. And soon, they were no longer satisfied with merely gathering intelligence on the periphery. They set their sights on the headquarters of Blackbird Heavy Industries, Blackbird City. However, that place was a different world. Mysterious and closed off, they couldn't even find a way in, as if that entire massive city, estimated to house 7 million people, didn't need to interact with the outside world at all. Chapter 451. The demon hunters had developed a keen interest in Blackbird City. The more mysterious, the more secrets it held. They could no longer dig up much intelligence in the western part of the continent, which was equivalent to 3 new conventional lands, and if they wished to learn more, infiltrating Blackbird City was their only option. After numerous attempts, they found several different ways to try to gain entry into Blackbird City. For instance, entering along with the supply channels. Or impersonating someone from Blackbird City. Or directly finding their way to the vicinity of Blackbird City, as a city so large was bound to have unguarded places where one could stealthily slip in. However, these attempts all ended in failure. In the process, they even lost several lives. Ultimately, they finally discovered a reliable method: being recruited. Blackbird City would periodically absorb some personnel from outside. Nobody knew what these people were going to do, but it was said there would be a better life for them. The demon hunters had replaced some of the people from the peripheral towns who were about to be absorbed into Blackbird City. This was not easy, but after all, Blackbird Heavy Industries' scrutiny of the outside was not as intense as inside the city. They spent nearly a year gathering intelligence on the periphery, integrating with the locals, and finally, they succeeded. 5 of them were selected to enter Blackbird City, the remaining 7 were not, but this was also good. They could provide support from the outside, transferring intelligence. Then, those who entered went completely dark. Island Bird was one of those on the outside. He was supposed to send out the intelligence as agreed, but he had never received anything. The people waiting for intelligence on the outside were getting anxious. Today, more than a month later, a new opportunity arose. Blackbird City's periodic personnel recruitment once again selected their people. Island Bird was involved. After some discussion, they decided to send Bird into Blackbird City. It was a large black vehicle. Together with more than 20 other people, he entered Blackbird City. Initially, they were concentrated in one corner of the city. According to the administrators, they would later be assigned to different jobs and residences. Bird found an opportunity, took the hidden pistol, and stealthily slipped out. However, inside the city, he found it extremely difficult to move. Walking in Blackbird City, he realized how the control of Blackbird Heavy Industries on the outside paled in comparison to the inside. Here, it was as if he were in an immensely large concentration camp. People were strictly controlled, there were patrols on the streets, and those without permission or legitimate business could not even loiter on the streets. What was most fearsome was that the civil servants, patrolmen, and so on that he saw were all extensively cybernetically augmented. Bionic eyes, prosthetic limbs, these were the most common things. Others, whose entire bodies had been transformed beyond recognition, with several mechanical arms extending from their backs and their lower halves reshaped into four-legged forms, were a common sight. Even purely automated robots moved about on the streets. This scene sent chills down Bird's spine. He was not ignorant of various situations, he was a heretic demon hunter. During the so-called training days, his mind was filled with a vast amount of information and knowledge. Before departing, they had also reviewed a lot of information collected within the Alliance about the Fatches family. The scene before him led him to an almost immediate thought: Blackbird Heavy Industries had violated two of the Empire's major decrees. The ban on autonomous machines, the ban on intelligent devices. The former prohibited any mechanical device capable of autonomous operation, servo skulls were not included, those were considered human, and the latter outright banned any computer or computer-like devices. These two decrees were aimed at warding off the omnipresent digital demons. In today's Empire world, the word demons might still be common, but electronic was truly unheard of. According to the knowledge passed down to his mind, any electronic device produced by humanity that had the ability to automate, to perform automatic calculations, could potentially be invaded by electronic demons, causing the machine to betray humanity. Calculators would give incorrect results, autonomous robots would pick up weapons and harm humans, automated production lines would suddenly start assembling killing machines and riot. Anything not directly controlled by human at critical junctions would eventually betray humanity. So the question arose, how did Blackbird Heavy Industries dare to do this? Weren't they afraid of death? Wasn't the Fatches family afraid of death? Bird realized that this was a very significant piece of intelligence and information. Although he did not fully understand why this was happening, he did not need to know any more. Even just based on what he saw on the streets, if he were to report back, it would be a huge deal. This matter, if escalated, would immediately authorize the Alliance to declare war on Blackbird Heavy Industries, though in reality, no such authorization was needed as the planetary governor was free to do as he pleased on his own planet. However, Blackbird Heavy Industries was special, being a property of the Fatches family. Without a proper reason, it would be difficult to justify conflict. Now no reason was needed. Even the Fatches family themselves were not safe. With such an incident at Blackbird Heavy Industries, it was likely that personnel from the Imperial Inquisition would have to conduct a thorough investigation into the three worlds of the Fatches family. Chapter 452. Moving on, it's not as simple as obtaining authorization when the Alliance strikes down on Blackbird Heavy Industries. Good luck getting that approved. If possible, both the Star Realm Army and the Imperial Navy will be involved. In other places, it might be a bit tricky. On an ordinary Empire world, after submitting an application for military support, no one knows how long one might have to wait for the regular forces of the Empire to provide assistance. But in the Tianma Star sector, this problem is greatly alleviated. The Tianma Star sector is the core of several surrounding star sectors and one of the most bustling areas in the entire Dragonhawk star domain. The Tianma fleet and the 3rd Dragonhawk Legion are stationed mainly within Tianma Star sector, with the mission to guard and patrol the safety and defense issues of the surrounding star sectors. Things may be slow elsewhere, but in the Tianma Star sector, the Navy and Star Realm Army truly arrive within minutes to suppress any incidents. Moreover, the governor, or rather the governor's family, wields a certain influence in the politics of the star sector. With such an incident, it might not even be necessary for the Alliance's military forces to fight desperately. As long as the intelligence is accurate and evidence is solid, the Alliance's forces only need to hold their position, and soon the Imperial Navy and the Star Realm Army will come to Rage Owl Star to wipe out Blackbird Heavy Industries. But wait, thinking of this, Bird realized another problem. The Dragonhawk 3rd Legion, that is, this Star Realm Armed Forces unit stationed in the Tianma Star sector, seems to have a deep relationship with the Fatches family. Their main base of operations is on 3 planets belonging to the Fatches. Hiss. This complicates things. Of course, Bird is just a spy. If there are some things he can't figure out, doesn't understand, doesn't know how to do, that's okay. After all, it's not his job to think about these matters. His only task was to get the intelligence out clearly. However, even this proved to be difficult. He could barely move an inch on the streets of Blackbird City, let alone break out of the city on his own. Within Blackbird City, the defense was not as tight. Although he didn't have a proper identity to pass through normally, there weren't many patrollers on the streets. As long as he kept his clothing consistent with others and avoided attention as much as possible, he was fine. It was slow, but he could still move. But to leave the city, he had to get past many checkpoints, the outermost one being exceedingly difficult. They lost 2 people without even finding a way in during their infiltration attempt, leaving now would likely be hellishly difficult. Forced to wander within the city, he was looking for the comrades who had infiltrated into the city earlier, hoping to get some help. At first, he did not hold out much hope. If he could notice and realize certain things, then surely the comrades who infiltrated earlier would also be aware. For such crucial intelligence, if possible, his comrades would not keep silent and would do their utmost to get the information out. The reason they hadn't done so was undoubtedly due to some very difficult realities, it's just that Bird hadn't encountered them yet. If he could find his comrades within the city, it would save him from taking many detours. One thing that worried him, though, was whether his comrades were still alive. Luckily, after wandering the streets for 2 days amidst relentless rain, with no place to resupply food, he stumbled upon an unexpected discovery. In a hidden spot, he saw a scythe symbol. This symbol was the rendezvous signal agreed upon by the comrades before entering the city. Seeing this sign, Bird realized that his comrades were not dead, at least not all of them. Overjoyed, he found an arrow mark near the symbol, wiped it away, and after searching for a full day, he finally arrived here. Knocking at the door, he encountered a child with modified eyes, was held at gunpoint, and found out it was Tim Winter, although his face was now disfigured. Despite the myriad doubts in his heart, he still followed Winter into a room. Here, another comrade lay, but he was now breathing in less and out more, obviously not long for this world without reliable medical support. Bird's heart skipped a beat, and a very bad thought occurred to him. And this thought was confirmed by Went, it's just the 2 of us left, Orga is also going to die. Bird was silent, his mood heavy. But he quickly adjusted his mindset and asked, I've seen the situation on the streets in the past 2 days, things are serious. However, you've been here for a month, have you gathered more intelligence? Went nodded and then shook his head. As for intelligence, yes, we have some. We know what the upper echelons of Blackbird Heavy Industries are enforcing is the same as the information we initially received in our minds about the Iron Heresy. They are breeding humans and then helping them evolve. This is manifested by their continuous incorporation of people from outside Blackbird City. These people settle down happily, kept in their custody. Then, according to quotas, they line up for glorious evolution, which is to be transformed into the mechanical and flesh hybrid monsters you've seen on the streets. On hearing this, Bird couldn't help but interrupt, the people being brought in, don't they resist? They can't resist, they don't have weapons, or a unified organization, how can they resist under strict surveillance? Tim Went said, however, as you say, not everyone is willing to accept this fate. It's for this reason that we have managed to survive. Cisne is the child you just saw outside. We settled in his home last week, thanks to the help of his family. At that time, his parents were still around, but yesterday, his parents lined up for glorious evolution and were taken away. Actually, he was also to be taken, but Orga and I hid him, and Orga almost died for it. Wait a minute. Bird realized another big problem, you've been exposed. Went's fierce face revealed a helpless smile, what else? How else would it be just Orga and me left? Then we need to move quickly. We've already moved, this isn't Sisney's home. This is a place where the owner has just been taken for glorious evolution, and new residents haven't moved in yet. Bird felt even heavier in his heart. Although he already knew the answer, Bird still couldn't help asking with the last hope, then have you found a way to get out? Who would have thought? Went curled his lips, revealing a terrifying smile. Yes, and I've been waiting for you to come, only you can do it. Bird was suddenly enlightened. He immediately understood what Went meant. These demon hunters all possessed a certain spiritual talent but were not strong enough to become a formal practitioner of spiritual energy. After their successful training, they would all receive a power similar to spiritual talent. Went's ability, homing pigeon, allowed him to construct with his spirit a pigeon capable of flying to deliver intelligence. But the homing pigeon he could conjure clearly wasn't strong enough to fly out of Blackbird City, otherwise they wouldn't have needed to wait until now. Bird's ability, on the other hand, was a weaker version of mind manipulation. According to Went, the way he wanted to escape would presumably involve making use of his own talent for mind manipulation. Bird said gravely, "Let's hear it." A day later, in a room on the second floor of a house on the streets of Blackbird City, Bird nervously waited. He peered down through a small crack in the window. Behind him on the bed, two men were tied together, mouths gagged, faces showing terror. A little further down the street, a few black, fully enclosed vehicles were slowly approaching. 4K. Chapter 453. A bird leapt out of the curtain of rain and flew high into the distance. Despite knowing it was unlikely, Island Bird still harbored a sliver of hope. If the spiritually energized pigeon he had summoned could make it out and deliver the intelligence, that would be ideal. This was precisely why they had planned to send Tim Winter into Blackbird City. With this ability, transmitting information would be much more convenient. But clearly, it would not be that easy. According to what Winter had said, he had tried before and not only failed but also caused exposure, attracting the crackdown from Blackbird Heavy Industries. And this time, the outcome was unsurprisingly the same. No sooner had the bird flown out than a red beam of light flashed across the sky. The spiritually energized bird was blasted to oblivion in mid-air. Island Bird let out a slight sigh. Although it was expected, he still felt some disappointment. Beyond disappointment, there was sorrow. He heard some noises, as guards hurried towards the spot from where the bird had emerged. There lay a demon hunter or god devoid of the ability to act, even of consciousness, awaiting death. Perhaps the people from Blackbird Heavy Industries would capture him alive and then heal him, hoping to extract some intelligence from him in return. But to prevent this scenario, Winter had already tampered with Orga's body before the operation, ensuring that his already short-lived life would end swiftly upon falling into enemy hands, beyond any hope of revival. Island Bird was pained to do such a thing to a comrade, but it was an act he had to commit nonetheless. And Winter, who had carried out the task, was himself in a position of sacrifice. After a considerable number of guards were drawn to the site of the bird's release, Winter also made his appearance. He launched an attack on a convoy of vehicles traveling on the street. The convoy below descended into chaos, but Island Bird could not bear to watch any further. Every member of the Demon Hunter squad was elite, not only well-trained warriors but also possessed special supernatural powers. Yet despite that, it was still an unwinnable struggle. First, they were vastly outnumbered, with Winter fighting a lone battle. Secondly, there was a lack of weapons and equipment. The fact that they were able to bring personal defensive weapons at all into Blackbird City was already a feat, as heavy weapons were out of the question, let alone a bomb. Moreover, the Union had no local base in Blackbird City, and in this highly regulated environment, there was no space for the existence of opposition organizations, making it equally impossible to acquire potent weapons from the surroundings. All Winter had was a short-barreled laser pistol with almost depleted ammunition. Again, his supernatural ability Bird was meant for intelligence transmission and lacked combat effectiveness. But still, he went into action, fighting with a conviction that it would be his last battle. Moreover, what he aimed to do was far from simply going out to die. Although he knew he had no way out once he took action, he still hoped to create as much disturbance as possible under the hopeless situation, to attract as much attention as he could. This wasn't about charging out simply to die. He had to kill, he had to be cold enough, smart enough to outwit his enemies, to buy as much time as possible, to draw away as much attention as possible. Only then would Island Bird have a chance. Orga was already dead, Winter was about to die, all to earn him that last sliver of hope to get out alive. And now, that chance truly did appear before him. Winter had indeed done well enough. His gun suddenly killed a driver and a guard accompanying the vehicle. Then, facing many encircling him, he calmly ducked into a building, exchanging fire with the enemies. When the mechanical guards with their mechanical dogs stormed the building, Winter had already preemptively moved through the window to another location and opened fire again. For over 10 minutes, Blackbird Heavy Industries guards didn't just fail to capture him, they were led in circles, which necessitated deploying more personnel. Even the convoy that was initially set to leave the city to bring in more inhabitants into Blackbird City had to be halted. Many guards disembarked and joined in the effort. This was the opportunity Bird was waiting for. Accompanying him was Cisne, the child left behind by the family that had taken in and sheltered his fellow warriors, and they both slipped out of the room and made their way down to the entrance on the first floor. Cracking the door slightly, Bird looked around. Utilizing his innate spiritual energy, he sensed for mental targets in the vicinity and determined that their attention was likely not on his location. It was a good time to make a move. He turned and emphasized to Cisne once again, "From now on, you must obey me. Without my permission, you can't make any sound at all. Whatever I tell you to do, you do it, understand?" "I know," Cisne nodded nervously, "Brother Winter had already explained it to me before." "Good, then follow me." When Winter and Bird were discussing the operation plan, they didn't whimsically decide to involve a child. Even though Cisne's parents had not betrayed them while helping Winter and Orga hide, they had also made a promise to Cisne's parents that if there was a chance, they would definitely help their son escape, but... Chapter 454. Given the current situation, even teammates needed to be silenced, used to attract the enemy at the very last moment of their lives, and Wendt himself had to risk his life to execute diversion tactics. Why would Bird saddle himself with a burden unless absolutely necessary? The reason was precisely that Cisne wasn't a burden. Cisne was obedient. His body had undergone initial mechanical modifications, making him more agile than the average child. The main purpose of having him was to serve as a cover for their identities when necessary. Cisne was a bona fide resident of Blackbird City, as was his father, and Bird had brought their genuine documents with him. In even worse circumstances, Cisne could be deceived into going out to draw the target's attention, giving Bird a chance to see if he could fight for a glimmer of hope at a critical moment. Hopefully, that last scenario would never materialize. With Cisne in tow, Bird crouched down and approached a black car. Through the car window, he saw a driver inside, craning his neck out of the opposite window to look around, focused on the battle situation between the two nearby buildings. The drivers used in these pickup operations by the Blackbirds were generally not machine servants extensively modified with cybernetic enhancements, but rather more normal humans. Otherwise, when recruiting people from the outside, it could easily lead to trouble. Bird didn't hesitate. He pulled out his pistol and, through the car window, fired a shot that went through the driver's head. Immediately afterward, he reached through the broken window, pulled open the car door, and dragged the corpse to lie under the driver's seat. Cisne hurried into the car as well and, sitting beside him, helped Bird strip off the driver's coat so Bird could change more quickly. While Bird was changing, Cisne started to clean the bloodstains, but Bird pushed his hand down. The sounds of battle outside had ceased. It seemed likely that Wendt was already dead. After a while, the guards gradually returned. The car convoy was ready to set out again. Before leaving, however, the guards checked each car. This was Bird's greatest test. What was so difficult about assassinating a driver amidst chaos when no one was watching and donning his clothes? The challenge lay in how to assume the driver's identity convincingly. There were too many holes in his disguise. The bullet hole in the car window could be explained away as a misfire during the recent fight, but what about the blood-stained work clothes? Claimed to be injured? If the guards asked him to leave the vehicle for inspection, the body couldn't be hidden. And if the guards recognized the original driver's face, Bird's facade would be pierced immediately. In other words, these were not just holes in the disguise, anyone with a functioning brain would realize there were problems. To cover all this up, he needed to rely on his talent for mental manipulation. But, he was a demon hunter, not a spiritual energy user. If he had the mighty powers of the legendary governor, what would be so hard about it? It wouldn't just be about covering a few discrepancies, he could entirely manipulate minds, turning people into his most loyal followers, making them brave fire and water or even commit suicide at his whim. But Island Bird was far from that level. The more intact and strong-willed the person's mind, the greater the chance of mental manipulation failure, the bigger the discrepancy between the manipulation and the person's perception, the more likely the manipulation would fail by multiple folds. Everything he was doing now, pretending to be the driver, wearing the driver's clothes, erasing the bloodstains as much as possible, was meant to reduce resistance during the mental manipulation process. It could be successful. But the fewer the discrepancies, the better. He couldn't let anyone see the body. Manipulating a person to overlook a corpse was impossible. He had to pray they wouldn't recognize his face, or the manipulation might also fail. He had to use his language during manipulation, be as error-free as possible, and explain away abnormal situations like bloodstains and bullet holes convincingly. The more plausible the excuse, the higher the chance they'd believe it and not investigate further. He pondered all this as the inspector guards got closer and closer. Suddenly, Bird's forehead was beaded with cold sweat. The approaching guard wasn't human. Underneath the hat, the face was a mechanical skull with no human brain tissue left. What to do? Mental manipulations worked on living beings, but Bird couldn't ensure their effectiveness on machine servants, let alone now facing what might be a cyborg even more advanced than a machine servant. At least machine servants, who had part of their brain removed and altered to maximize instinctual motor functions, still counted as part of humanity, a pure mechanical being. Well, would mind manipulation still be effective? But what other choice did he have? He could only grit his teeth and continue with the original plan. Approaching the car window, the guard's steps halted as he indeed took notice of the bullet hole on the window. Bird's deliberately relaxed voice rang out, "Did you catch the person just now? They've damaged my car window." With his words, the ability to manipulate minds quietly activated. He tapped into the other's mind. Do mechanical beings even have minds? This question he couldn't be sure of before now had an answer. They indeed do. But it feels utterly different from humans. That icy touch was as though he had been plunged into ice water, causing him to shiver. And in this icy sea of mind, Bird could find no traces of human emotions. All he encountered were the chilly commands and logic. Was this good news or bad news? The bad news was that much of Bird's past experience with mind manipulation was now useless. His experience was mostly in extracting intelligence during interrogations. The most effective tactic was to enhance certain emotions, such as panic, pain, or fear, in conjunction with standard interrogation techniques to shatter the subject's resilience. That trick was no longer useful. Mechanical creatures do not have emotions. What's there to amplify? But the good news was that mind manipulation was still possible. Only now, instead of altering emotions or memories, he had to twist commands and logic. The former was impossible, at least he didn't have the skill to twist instructions hard-coded into a mechanical being's processing chip. But distorting logic was feasible. And surprisingly easy. The guard's eyes flickered red for a moment. Seeing the bullet hole, its logic was twisted to perceive it as incidental damage from earlier strife, logical. Seeing the bloodstains on the window and the driver's clothes, its logic was twisted to attribute them to wounds from incoming bullets, logical. The direction of the blood splatter was from inside out, inconsistent with the bullet's entry, illogical, disregard, deemed logical. The face was unfamiliar, but because of the blood smearing from the driver's injuries it appeared different from recorded footage, illogical, disregard, deemed logical. Everything is normal, no need for a thorough check. The guard walked away. Only after Bird saw in the rearview mirror that the guard's gaze was no longer on them did he allow the smile to fall from his face. He leaned on the steering wheel with both hands, breathing heavily. His head was splitting, his arms were trembling. It wasn't just from the tension, but also due to the immense consumption of spiritual energy. Yet on his face, there still lingered a faint smile. At least, the most challenging part at the beginning was over. Instructions to depart came from the car's radio. Bird started the vehicle. There were still many difficulties ahead. The method of driving the vehicle, the feel of it was different from the Alliance's vehicles, the corpse underfoot was extremely bothersome, lying on top of his feet, making it hard to control. Fortunately, he wasn't required to race, nor did he have to show off too much skill. All he had to do was do his best to keep the vehicle stable and moving forward. Chapter 455. Through the glass window, Gu Hang watched the restless little boy being questioned by an Alliance intelligence officer. To soothe his mind, they had specifically chosen a lady for the task, who was comforting Cisne's emotions while speaking to him. Their conversation, amplified by loudspeakers, was audible to those outside. Although Cisne didn't know much of 5 or 6-year-old child, no matter how clever, modified, or mature, could hardly summarize and extract all sorts of intelligence like a well-trained espionage agent. After all, he had lived in that city for 2 or 3 years. Many things he mentioned might seem like insignificant details, but when gathered and deduced, they might yield an important piece of intelligence. However, those were all trivial matters. The core piece of intelligence. Blackbird Heavy Industries violated the smart mechanisms ban, and Blackbird City has become a nest of smart mechanisms. Gu Heng already knew this. All other matters were just details under this major piece of intelligence. Not insignificant, but Gu Heng didn't need to consider them further, he could just look back at what the intelligence officer compiled. Gu Heng was thinking about how to make use of this entire piece of intelligence. Lambert Hodgson, who accompanied him, also dared not to speak and disturb him. He knew that with such a big matter, Mr. Gu certainly needed to think it through. He was thinking too. This incident would inevitably lead to many more significant events, and perhaps the Tianma Star sector, which had just been peaceful for a short time, was about to face war once again. Moreover, this time the enemy was not some mindless monsters or locals with inferior equipment. This was Blackbird Heavy Industries, supported by the infamous Fatches family in the Tianma Star sector. Now that their violation of the smart mechanisms ban had been exposed, their production capacity and the quality of military equipment could not be treated like past enemies. Based on the intelligence returned from the front, with a population of 15 million on the continent west, Blackbird City alone was estimated to have 7 million. Blackbird Heavy Industries had a high level of organization of these people. If it came to a war of attrition, under extreme conscription, they could muster an army of at least 1.5 million, and perhaps even as many as 3 million. Did the Alliance want to engage in a war of attrition with them? How many would die? How much labor, originally for economic construction, would need to be converted into soldiers on the battlefield? How long would the Alliance's development be stalled because of this? And thinking deeper, was Blackbird Heavy Industries still the same as before? The ban on smart mechanisms wasn't just for show, it wasn't about the Empire choosing to shackle itself. It was a deeply reluctant decision born out of necessity. Don't say that the level of development of intelligent algorithms isn't enough to generate a smart mechanisms crisis and everything will be fine, that is simply not the case. Even something as basic as a calculator could become infected by electronic demons, calculating 1 plus 1 to be 365. Those that had been created, already exceeding the lowest threshold of mechanical servants and becoming fully mechanized, even by the Empire's definition could not be considered human anymore. Those modified humans, the mechanical dogs created by the automatic machines, those automated production lines, are there still people in control now? From this perspective, could the Alliance win? Even if a genuine smart mechanisms crisis erupted, one could request the support of the Star Realm Army and Imperial Navy, but the Alliance would have to hold out until then. Could they? His thoughts were in turmoil, and the more he thought, the heavier he felt. At that moment, Mr. Gu's voice suddenly rang in his ears. Did that island bird make it back alive? What? Lambert was momentarily startled before realizing that the governor was referring to a member of the Demon Hunter Squad who had been sent on a mission to the continent west. He snapped out of the grand narrative and quickly recalled, then said to Gu Heng, "No. As soon as we received the message, we made a request to our brothers in the Air Force. Wind Falcon took off within half an hour. But the continent west is really too far. Even with Wind Falcon's speed, it would take over 15 hours of flight to get there. In the end, including this little boy, only 3 people were brought back. Island Bird is not on the list of survivors." After a pause, Lambert continued, "According to the account of the 2 surviving demon hunters, Island Bird likely disguised himself as a personnel transport driver. He managed to pass through the city checkpoint with Cisne and got to the outskirts of Blackbird City. However, due to the presence of guards, he couldn't leave immediately or make contact with his comrades. After the transport team reached the town where his teammates were and loaded a group of people, he took a risk. Disguised as a local, he tried to escape with Cisne but didn't succeed that time and was forced to resist on the spot. His comrades appeared in time and saved them. But, being outnumbered and with their location exposed, they could only send out a distress signal and hold their ground to wait for rescue. By the time Wind Falcon arrived with the elite Special Forces team, only 2 of them were left alive." Lambert recounted the events to Mr. Gu, his tone tinged with a hint of lament. 15 had set out, and only 2 returned. Though they obtained crucial intelligence, the sacrifice was still heavy, unavoidably eliciting exclamation. Chapter 456. Gu Heng nodded slightly, not saying much more. The corresponding consolation, merits, and rewards, and even the follow-up arrangements for this child named Cisne, didn't need his further input. He believed his subordinates would handle things well. After returning, Gu Heng sat in thought for a while before summoning someone to initiate an interstellar communication. On the other end was none other than his mother. The image of Miss Wang Qi appeared before Gu Heng, looking rather tired. Very busy? Gu Heng asked. Yes, Wang Qi nodded, without elaborating further. After the Heijian star incident, Wang Qi lived, Gu Ming died, and Gu Heng formally became the nominal Gu clan head, but he had not yet met the most important powers of the clan, nor the most important group of power holders, the remaining 12 fleet leaders. All such matters were being managed by Wang Qi. Gu Heng was fine with this, as it had been agreed upon with his mother. Even if he were asked to take up the real power of the family head now, he wouldn't be particularly keen. His focus was solely on the actual governance and development. He had no time to manage the family's business. Although the family business was large in scale, in his view, its foundation was not solid enough and its potential for future development was limited. It was not the path he wished to follow. Moreover, he did not understand the workings of interstellar commerce. After the recent events, his perception of Wang Qi had changed. Handing everything over to his mother, he felt quite at ease. And his mother, Miss Wang Qi, was truly exhausted during this time. They won, indeed, but the victory had left a huge fissure in the Gu commercial firm. The whole firm, being franchise in nature, teetered on the verge of disbanding. The staff were unsettled, business was unstable. Eradicating Gu Ming's line completely, restoring the related business operations, appeasing the people, reconnecting the star sectors, and even the various political landscapes beyond the star sectors kept her extraordinarily busy every day. She would have liked her son to help, but he fended her off with not understanding, not familiar. So much so that now, when Gu Heng's call came through, she did not show her lazy son any good expression, asking stiffly, "What's the matter?" Gu Heng had some understanding of his mother's current state and mentality. He was very considerate of this. And he told his mother all about the situation in Blackbird City. After hearing the news, Wang Qi's virtual image remained motionless before Gu Heng for a long while, making Gu Heng wonder if there was some problem with the signal. It took a good while before Wang Qi let out a long sigh. What is this mess? One problem after another. It took her a long while to come back to her senses. After that sigh, she forced the tiredness out of her mind and faced her son seriously, saying, "You do realize the seriousness of this, don't you?" Gu Heng slowly nodded. "Then let me add 2 pieces of intelligence for you," she said. Wang Qi pondered, considering her words, before speaking. "The first piece of news is from within the star sector. The situation on Karolia 3 is deteriorating, a nest capital with a population of 1 billion has fallen. Countless residents have been turned into plague zombies under dark magic, and many more have been displaced, spreading the plague everywhere. The main Star Realm Legion stationed in the Tianma Star Sector, the Dragonhawk 3rd Legion, has urgently dispatched an army group, over 1.5 million soldiers, aboard the Tianma fleet to Karolia 3. Having relayed the objective reality, Wang Qi paused, then added some analysis, "But in my estimation, even so, it will be difficult to quell the situation. I suspect the situation on Karolia 3 will deteriorate rapidly. This is no small matter. The population of Karolia 3 accounts for 56% of the entire Tianma Star Sector, a whopping 40 billion people. If chaos erupts there, its impact will certainly not be limited to a single planet. Flying Wing Star, with a population of 10 billion and an annual output value of over 40 billion, is prosperous partly because Karolia 3 serves as a huge market and source of raw materials." Hearing this, Gu Heng inevitably became concerned. This was new intelligence for him. He quickly recalled the urgent recall of the battle nuns. He had thought that after the return of Georgette and more than 30 nuns to Karolia 3, the situation should have been contained. But it seemed things were not so simple. And according to his mother, if Karolia 3 fell into turmoil, so would Flying Wing Star, which was tightly economically linked to Karolia. With Flying Wing Star's output rapidly declining, it would no longer be easy to face the imperial tax. The total population of Tianma Star Sector might be just over 70 billion, and these 2 planets together accounted for 50 billion. If they both were engulfed in turmoil. What a complete disaster! At the same time, Gu Heng realized that these 2 worlds were at the heart of Pei Desi's power in the Star Sector. The Fatches family's 3 worlds, Fatches number 1, number 2, and No 3, with a combined population of 20 billion, were their stronghold. It seemed as though they were unperturbed. Oh, not that they were without issues. Gu Heng was about to cause trouble for them. But they were closely related to the main force of the Star Realm army in the Star Sector, the Dragonhawk 3rd Legion. A large amount of manpower and supplies came from the 3 Fatches planets. Would they fully support Pei Desi in quelling the turbulence? Probably not so easy. This time, the 150,000 Star Realm soldiers sent to Karolia 3 might seem like a lot, but that was just about it. Chapter 457. Now, Gu Heng has exposed a scandal about Blackbird Heavy Industries violating the intelligence ban, which will give Pei Desi an opportunity to attack the Fatches family, and it is a very serious reason. What can Fatches do? Sever the relationship? Or, in order to clear themselves of the connection, might they declare it as Blackbird Heavy Industries' independent action? On one hand, they manage relations, and on the other hand, might they react extremely vehemently, willing to promote a large-scale arrival of the Star Realm army to destroy Blackbird Heavy Industries and incidentally destroy the evidence? By the way, this also gives the Fatches family an excuse to reduce support from the Star Realm army for Karolia 3, Dark Magic Plague and Smart Mechanisms Crisis. Comparing the two, which is more severe and which is lighter, how can one say? The Dark Magic Plague could infect tens of billions of people, and if the Smart Mechanisms Crisis is ignored, there might not be much of a population on Rage Owl Star to get infected. But if the Smart Mechanisms reached a certain level of control, they would autonomously mine, produce machinery, and muster an army. This is something that humans cannot compete with, as it takes more than a decade to mature a human population. Who knows how many combat machines would come off the production lines in a single day? For now, let's not consider whether this is alarmist or not, after all, it is an argument. From this perspective, it doesn't seem like good news for the head of Pei Desi. And being involved, what should one do? The Gu clan has always been an ally of Pei Desi, and Gu Heng himself has benefited quite a lot, but compared to Fufana and the Pei brothers, the ties between the Gu clan and Fatches have been the most relaxed, with some cooperation in recent years. It's just that last time, in order to save his mother, Gu Heng promised Pei Desi to fall out with the Fatches family. Hey? If you let me hit Blackbird, wouldn't that give me a legitimate reason to fight? It might even be possible to drag the Fatches family into the fight as well. As for falling out with Fatches, the Gu family's corresponding trade embargo is already in effect. Gu Heng had discussed this matter with his mother before. The Gu family would definitely carry out the agreement with Pei Desi. Not to mention the actual benefits, they couldn't afford to lose their political reputation. The Gu clan is in business, and reputation is as important as life itself. But there were also some grey areas. It didn't make sense to completely isolate the 3 planets of Fatches, that's Empire World, and the Gu commercial firm is a subsidiary of the Empire Commerce Guild. How can you say you won't do business when you won't do business? That would be against imperial law. This was a legal rationale that could stand up. Wang Qi had had many communications with Pei Desi, appearing to be in a difficult position. The Fatches family was complaining to a higher-level institution within the Commerce Guild, making it hard for the Gu commercial firm to operate. They could only try not to violate the Guild's regulations by reducing trade volume and prohibiting the circulation of certain categories of goods. This was on one hand to explain themselves to Pei Desi and on the other hand to appease Fatches by showing them their helplessness. Naturally, this was about not offending either side, currying favor with both, reaping benefits from all directions. If handled well, they could maintain the balance, benefiting from both sides without falling out with either. If not, they could offend both sides, a move that greatly tested Wang Qi's skill. But that's just how things are. What everlasting friends or enemies are there? Did Pei Desi not kick Gu clan when they were down, using the provision of a navy title as leverage to compel Gu Heng to act? And even though Pei Desi is hostile to Fatches, not to mention their countless unsavory private dealings, they haven't really fallen out on the surface. It makes no sense for the Gu commercial firm to break with Fatches first. This matter is not as simple as just a crisis on Rage Owl Star, it involves a much wider range. The situation has become deeply murky. How will it evolve in the future? Gu Heng was still pondering, but his mother had already begun speaking of the second piece of information. Another matter is about the imperial tax. What's happening with the imperial tax? Isn't the collection starting in just over a month? Normally, a fleet from the Star Territory Taxation Department would come to the Tianma Star Sector, visiting each planet to collect taxes, then take all the collected items to the capital wing star for settlement with the head of state, stamping, and afterward leaving the Tianma star sector to return to the capital of the Dragonhawk star domain. Yes, that's the tax collection process. But this year is a little different. The tax fleet coming to the Tianma star sector is not a sub-fleet, but the main tax fleet of the Dragonhawk star domain. Gu Heng deeply furrowed his brow. Why have they arranged it this way? Hear me out, Wang Qi continued. It's not just the main star domain tax fleet coming, but also a very important figure, the Sun Lord's war apostle, Bakoya Galaraldo. Gu Heng's eyes widened at this. Galaraldo, now that's a name that resounds like thunder. This man's stage wasn't some minor star sector or star domain level, he was an empire hero, one of the 46 war apostles of the Sun Lord. And the Sun Lord, Suo he came, this person can almost be counted as one of the most important figures in the empire today, the ruler of the empire. Of course, the true ruler of the empire would always be the emperor, a fact that is eternal and unchanging. But after the eternal and immortal emperor ascended, the highest governing body managing the boundless human empire was the Human Supreme Council. This Supreme Council had 13 seats, with some components fixed, such as representatives of the state religion, the Mars representative, the Judgment Chief of the Imperial Inquisition, the Imperial Prime Minister. Some were relatively fixed but occasionally vacant, such as the Grand Marshal of the Star Realm Army, the Imperial Navy Grand Marshal, the Psychic Cultivator Assembly Representative. Chapter 458. Some positions appear regularly, contingent on the current political climate of the empire. This type includes a great many, such as the representative of the Starfighter Battle Group, the Imperial Commerce Association President, heads of the Administrative Department, Legal Department, Department of Taxation, Military Affairs Department, as well as the Chief of the Imperial Star Language Hall and an indefinite number of representatives elected by the vote of the Cosmos Domain speakers. There are also positions that may not always be established, such as the once existing Imperial Regent, Supreme Commander and, for the first time in the history of the current empire, the title of Sun Lord. Solakium was originally the son of a planetary governor, who established a Star Realm Legion and joined the Star Realm Army, and after leading his troops to glory in battle, he swiftly became a general. Then, with an invincible record of victories, he rose rapidly through the ranks, caught the eye of the Marshal of the Star Realm Army at that time, was trained as a successor, and subsequently, with immense prestige and incomparable military achievements, took over as the youngest Marshal of the Star Realm Army, entering the Supreme Council at that time he was only 32 years old. Afterward, he gained the support of the Supreme Council and commenced the Solar Expedition. At first, it was a mere campaign, but when he conquered 600 worlds in 3 years, his expedition expanded like a rolling snowball. It was not only that numerous forces from across the empire joined him, but he also received support from more than 10 starfighter battle groups. And by the 13th year, with 6,000 planets reclaimed, his tremendous prestige meant he was no longer just the Marshal of the Star Realm Army. He left this position to a general he deeply trusted, pushed more generals into the Supreme Council, and bestowed upon himself the title of Sun Lord. The Sun, being the star of humanity's cradle, Earth, the authority behind such a title is self-evident. Now, after 35 years, the Solar Expedition has reclaimed over 20,000 Empire worlds, endless armies continue the great campaign under his command, with more than 100 starfighter battle groups serving him. Among the reclaimed worlds, many were not even lost by the Empire but had been suspended in isolation from the far-flung ancient times, never having heard the names of the Emperor or Empire. These newly reclaimed worlds have already formed an entirely new cosmos domain named Solaria. Nowadays, the Sun Lord is the highest authority in the human empire, a hero known to all, a mortal who has earned the respect and loyalty of countless warriors, whose commands are seen as those of the Emperor, with even the Terra Supreme Council acting under his dazzling radiance. However, Gu Heng was reminded once again of many realities. Does the entire empire truly support the Solar Expedition? Perhaps not. In Gu Heng's view, given the empire's inefficiency, such administrative efficiency is extremely low in relation to such a vast territory, with resources being used poorly. And with the relentless pace of the Solar Expedition, conquering 20,000 planets in 35 years, averaging 3 planets every 2 days, this has far exceeded the limits of the empire's administrative structures. A large number of newly conquered worlds cannot be effectively managed, are in states of anarchy, not only failing to supply the empire but becoming burdens instead. The Military Affairs Department is also vocally troubled by the lengthening supply lines. Local worlds must supply a great deal of materials. The imbalance of local powers leaves regional threats difficult to address with sufficient force. The solar expedition, after reaching this point in its duration, has become an unbearable burden to the Empire. And darker thoughts arise. With his current age of 65 and life-extending surgeries, he could live for much longer, but within the mechanics of the Empire, there are already beginning to lose effective means to check his power. Can the Empire accept the existence of a mortal emperor? Can the Supreme Council really continue to bear a sun above their heads? But no matter what, he is still that hero, that Sunday. And one of his 46 war apostles is about to arrive at the Tianma star sector. Chapter 459. Was Galaraldo, this war apostle, visiting the Tianma star sector for a vacation? Clearly, he was not. The Solar Expedition Army was in the midst of its vigorous campaign, and as one of the 46 apostles, Galaraldo was very busy. In the Solar Expedition Army, an average of 1.5 planets were brought under control daily, and the Sun Lord's squeezing of the entire army was terrifying. He exploited the potential of the whole army to the limit, with every soldier contributing their strength to the utmost. Not to mention the trust he placed in war apostles, members of the inner circle. Some of Galaraldo's colleagues, also war apostles, independently led their own expeditionary forces with fleets and Star Realm army, conquering territories across the Star Sea. Others were deployed into battle groups, even commanding sprawling battalions of starfighters. Some took on additional roles like bishops of the state religion, mobilizing the church's power, especially the battle nuns, to assist the legions in combat. In the competition for honor and military achievements, apostles, marshals, and generals divided themselves into numerous branches. Upon arriving at a planet, with a grand show of force, those who surrendered were enlisted as planetary governors, and the collection of imperial taxes would follow, marking the planet as reconquered. Those who did not surrender faced orbital bombardments that lasted days, destroying military and civilian structures alike, regardless of whether the job was done thoroughly or not. Then the army would land and swiftly sweep through, appoint a planetary governor, or temporarily find an officer, even a staff officer, to assume the role. Once this was done, aside from a small contingent left to garrison, the army promptly moved on to the next battlefield. When encountering civilizations spanning multiple star systems, the conflict tended to last longer. But even against such expansive civilizations, a single space battle, a destructive assault on their capital planet, could sometimes suffice to subdue several, or even a dozen worlds. Of course, there were battles that dragged on, with the enemy demonstrating particularly fierce resistance. In such cases, more troops would be summoned for reinforcement, and sometimes even nearby starfighter battle groups were called to action. With one or two battle groups, thousands of starfighters, any civilization would be flattened. Currently, the main legions branched off from the Solar Expedition Army numbered over a dozen, and there were probably hundreds of squadrons operating and fighting simultaneously. It was this kind of efficiency that fostered a rate of 3 worlds conquered every 2 days on average. And Galaraldo? As a war apostle, if he wasn't on the battlefield, what was he doing here? His duties are quite important. Gu Hang listened as his mother's voice rose, laced with a hint of a sneer. The grandeur of the Solar Expedition Army requires astronomical amounts of material support. Even with the Empire's full backing, the oceans of imperial taxes collected from countless worlds, when poured into the bottomless pits that are the Solar Expedition Army and Solaria, still can't satiate this behemoth. Galaraldo's duty is to secure new reinforcements for the expeditionary force beyond what is obtained from imperial taxes. Over the past decade, he has traveled through many star domains, delivering ship after ship of resources to the expeditionary force, effectively supplementing what the imperial taxes couldn't cover. Though he does not lead troops directly, according to the Sun Lord, his contribution is equivalent to the might of a billion-strong army. After hearing all this, Gu Hang slowly recovered from the shock of a high-profile individual visiting the Tianma star sector. So, you mean, this person came here to scrounge up more resources? Yes, but this resource scrounger isn't easy to dismiss. Moreover, the situation in the Tianma star sector, already on the brink of chaos, is likely to become even more chaotic. The mother and son discussed for a while. As a result, Gu Hang gained a general understanding of the entire backdrop of the coming situation in the star sector. In the coming years, the entire Tianma star sector would probably transition from a relatively peaceful state to one of overall turmoil. But Gu Hang also had a nascent thought. Chaos presents opportunities. If things had remained as they were, with Paydesi maintaining firm control over the richest and most populous planets in the star sector, aligning with the Navy, not getting on with the Fatches family but also not explicitly confronting them, and all planets in a peaceful state. Gu Heng would have had no other aspirations and would have been content to just farm on Rage Owl Star for many more years. Now, however, many opportunities might arise. This war apostle might just be one such opportunity. Scrounge up resources. Let him scrounge, as long as he brings Gu Heng what he needed. All right, his mother's voice, pulling him out of his reverie, said, I've shared with you the intelligence I have, along with my analysis. What do you plan to do next? What are your thoughts, mother? And how can our family leverage this series of events? Gu Heng was mainly referring to Blackbird's violation of the smart mechanism's prohibition. The other two issues, whether the Karolia uprising or Galaraldo's arrival, were widely known. Only the matter of Blackbird was freshly acquired intelligence. But his mother responded, You don't need to worry about what the family can gain from this. I'm asking you, what outcome do you wish to achieve? Let's focus on the situation on Rage Owl Star first, and I'll do my best to facilitate that. From there, we'll consider what the family should do. Since his mother put it that way, Gu Heng didn't hold back. After pondering for a moment, he said, The scenario I want is quite straightforward, quickly eradicate Blackbird and any potential smart mechanisms crisis from Rage Owl Star, while trying to minimize the costs, preferably without destroying the continent of Xi, otherwise it will cost a lot to rebuild. Chapter 460. Wang Qi said, You really are greedy. Gu Heng laughed and asked, Isn't it mother who asked me to make requests? Is there a way to achieve this? Wang Qi was just cursing casually. In fact, she had already had some ideas. To achieve your goal, you'll need enough Star Realm army to help. That means we can't completely offend the Fatches family. I need to inform them about Blackbird. Unless their entire family has violated the smart mechanisms ban, which is unlikely, just Blackbird's violation alone would make them even more eager than you to take down Blackbird. But that will offend Paydesi, and the Imperial Navy won't help transport the army. Wang Qi smiled. For naval battles, the Chamber of Commerce fleet of our family may not cut it, but for transportation, even when added together, the Tianma fleet is no match for ours. As for the issue of offending Paydesi, we might, and we might not. We could also mediate and help them with their biggest concern, the issues with Karolia 3. The Fatches family, feeling guilty about their violation, will lend a hand. Well, speaking of Karolia 3, I also have some thoughts about this matter. Wang Qi's face turned sour. You also want to take advantage of this situation? Gu Heng said with a smile, Of course, the biggest constraint on the development of Rage Owl Star is the lack of population. I need people, and there are 40 billion people suffering from disaster on Karolia 3. As a subject of the Empire, it's my unshirkable duty to help the citizens of the Empire. Wang Qi sneered, How would that work? No matter the disaster, the population is still wealth. One person, 5 tax currency, are you going to buy them? Of course, that's unaffordable. Gu Heng's attitude was very gentle. He was asking for a favor. Mother dear will definitely have a way. Humph, now you know to curry favor with me. Hee hee. A nursing mother is a mother indeed, let alone one's own flesh and blood mother. Seeing that Wang Qi was deep in thought, Gu Heng did not disturb her further, merely waiting quietly. After a while, Wang Qi spoke slowly, It's not like there are no ways at all. How many people do you want? I wouldn't mind having as many as possible. Can you afford to support that many people? Don't bite off more than you can chew. Gu Heng said earnestly, When you last came to Rage Owl Star, you at least got a bird's eye view of our Biking Valley province. Currently, with the annual grain output here and by the standards of Rage Owl Star, we can feed 50 million people. Currently, the population under my governance is only 25 million. We are not lacking in food. At least bringing in tens of millions of people would be no problem. The per capita living standards and food consumption on Karolia 3 cannot reach the levels of Rage Owl Star. This was a truth. The 40 billion population on Karolia 3, mostly poor, lived on the verge of hunger, with per capita food consumption probably not even reaching 30% of Rage Owl Star's E5 level, just barely enough to avoid starvation, eating nothing but corpse starch, at best. The corpse starch on Rage Owl Star was now even used to feed livestock. In an extreme scenario, it wasn't just another 25 million that could be supported, 50 million wouldn't be a problem. Moreover, Gu Heng continued, the Viking Valley region has a vast amount of farmland yet to be developed. The reason it hasn't been developed isn't due to anything else but a lack of population, a lack of agricultural workers. If all 12 billion acres of arable land were developed, considering other aspects of food production, I could support 300 million people without any issues. You sure are capable, she said sarcastically, but actually Wang Qi knew this was praise, although she wasn't used to complimenting her son. She simply changed the subject and got back to the matter at hand. We could follow the imperial migration decree and relocate populations as free immigrants. Our family's Chamber of Commerce fleet could help with transport. But we will have to talk to Pei Desi about this. Moreover, you should also be prepared to pay some price, as the population won't be given to you for nothing. However, since you have an abundance of food reserves, at that time, you might offer a certain amount of food aid, consumer goods aid, and military hardware aid. Isn't that still basically buying? The price will be much, much lower, said Wang Qi. This time, of the 40 billion tax currency that Karolia 3 has to pay, the proportion from the human tax is likely to increase substantially because of this. Their demand for various kinds of supplies will also increase, an excess population will become a burden for them, and they will be willing to let go of some. I estimate the overall cost could be brought down to 1 tax currency per person, or even lower. Gu Heng nodded slightly. Although it was regrettable not to get them for free, he also knew that one must not be too greedy. So, Gu Heng spoke again, there's also the third matter regarding intelligence, can I possibly? Seeing her eyes widen, Gu Heng laughed a little, feeling a bit embarrassed to continue asking. But what's a little embarrassment? Benefits are what truly matter. He pressed on shamelessly, the apostles of war are coming to the Tianmistar sector, ensuring that the imperial tax of the Tianmistar sector for the expedition is secured, and on top of that, they want to collect an extra windfall. That's fine, Rage Owl Star can support an additional expedition tax, and we might even get Hajian Star to support this tax as well. But can I, rightfully and legitimately, take control of Hajian Star? Your appetite is huge. Wang Qi already regretted saying focus on Rage Owl Star first earlier. Who knew Gu Heng could be so good at capitalizing on opportunities? His son wasn't like this before. It's an opportunity that comes once in 1,000 years, Gu Heng confidently said, how can I not take it? When next time will there be someone with the power to appoint one person to govern 2 places in the Tianmistar sector? Who knows when that will be? Your Rage Owl Star has only 20 million people, and you want to swallow up Hajian Star with its 400 million? Aren't you afraid of bursting? At least I'll get the name and the legal principles established. This is beneficial for the family too, isn't it? After that, Hajian Star will be all mine, and there won't be incidents like the one with Gu Ming again. After pondering for a while, Wang Qi said, the price will be very high. Mother, do you remember what I told you? As a ruler, you can't only consider the price, Gu Heng replied. Don't give me that crooked logic of yours, Wang Qi said, I will try. Gu Heng was overjoyed. Then, I thank you, mother. After hanging up the communication, Gu Heng was indeed extremely happy. If the 3 requests he made to his mother, from eliminating Blackbird to population growth and to becoming the governor of Hajian Star, could all be realized, that would be wonderful, equating to eliminating threats, increasing potential, and expanding externally all at once. Of course, he knew that things probably wouldn't go that smoothly, there could very well be complications. But if there were problems, then he would solve them, this path had to be taken. Just like now. Gu Heng wouldn't place all his hopes on his mother. Frankly speaking, it wasn't impossible that the entire Fatches family had violated the ban on intelligence and was controlled by smart mechanisms. He still needed to be prepared to deal with the current crisis on his own. The whole alliance system had already begun to operate. Firstly, the ambassador from Blackbird Heavy Industries stationed in the alliance had already been taken for tea by Lambert's special agents. There was no longer any talk of turning faces, the Demon Hunter squad had made quite a ruckus to the west of the mainland, and Blackbird Heavy Industries was probably prepared for this. Gu Heng still hoped to get more intelligence from the mouth of the ambassador sent by the Blackbird group. However, results came quickly. The Blackbird ambassador and several attendants who were taken for tea suddenly died of cerebral hemorrhage 17 minutes after their arrest. External personnel from the Alliance Hospital performed autopsies on the bodies and found that, although they looked nearly human on the outside, they had significant mechanical modifications inside. It was a bit regrettable but an expected outcome. Gu Hang simply had Lambert continue to send people to the west for intelligence gathering. The Demon Hunter squad would go again. Just having demon hunters wasn't enough, with their limited numbers, Lambert would also arrange for hundreds of ordinary special agents to participate. Intelligence work was of course dangerous, but it was a necessary task.